At the center of this stood the Blackwood residence, a home that seemed to embody the American dream. From the outside, the Blackwoods appeared to be the very image of a perfect blended family. Terrence Blackwood, a distinguished man in his early 50s with salt and pepper hair, had built a small empire in real estate development. His wife of 3 years, Lorelei, was a former model whose grace and charm had seemingly not faded with age. Ivy, Terrence's biological daughter from his first marriage, was a bright and ambitious college student, while Callum, Lorelei's son from her previous marriage, had recently graduated and was on the cusp of starting his own career. To their neighbors and friends, the Blackwoods represented success, unity, and the possibility of second chances. Terrence and Lorelei's whirlwind romance and subsequent marriage had been the talk of Maple Grove, a beacon of hope for those who believed in love after loss. The integration of their children into a cohesive family unit seemed effortless, a testament to their parenting and the adaptability of youth. Yet beneath this carefully cultivated image of familial bliss, currents of tension and secrets ran deep. The walls of their house held whispers of unspoken truths, forbidden desires, and simmering resentments. Terrence Blackwood's journey to the pinnacle of suburban success was paved with both triumph and tragedy. Born to working-class parents in Pittsburgh, he had clawed his way up the socio-economic ladder through sheer determination and an uncanny ability to spot lucrative real estate opportunities. By his mid-30s, Terrence had established a company that would eventually reshape the skyline of several mid-sized Pennsylvania cities. His first marriage to Elizabeth, a college sweetheart, had been a partnership of equals. Together, they navigated the challenges of building a business while raising their daughter, Ivy. Elizabeth's sudden death from an aneurysm when Ivy was just 12 had left Terrence a widower, forcing him to balance his grief with the responsibilities of single parenthood and an expanding enterprise. For 5 years, Terrence poured himself into work and fatherhood, his romantic life relegated to the back burner. It wasn't until a chance encounter at a charity gala that he met Lorelei Vaughn, a woman whose allure would reignite his passion for life and love. Lorelei's path had been markedly different from Terrence's. Discovered by a modeling scout at 16, she had graced runways and magazine covers throughout her 20s. Her marriage to photographer Julian Reeves had produced a son, Callum, but the union crumbled under the weight of Julian's infidelities and Lorelei's fading modeling career. Divorced at 35, Lorelei found herself navigating single motherhood and a world that seemed to value youth above all else. When Terrence and Lorelei's worlds collided, it was as if the universe had decided to grant them both a second chance at happiness. Their courtship was swift and intense, culminating in a lavish wedding that was the social event of the year in Maple Grove. The newly formed Blackwood family moved into the house, ready to begin their life together. Ivy Blackwood, now 20 and studying psychology at a prestigious university, had initially struggled with her father's remarriage. Fiercely intelligent and deeply loyal to her late mother's memory, Ivy approached her new family dynamic with a mixture of skepticism and reluctant acceptance. Over time, however, she found herself warming to Lorelei's genuine attempts at connection and the novel experience of having a brother figure in her life. Callum Reeves, 22 and freshly graduated with a degree in business, viewed his mother's marriage to Terrence with a pragmatic eye. He appreciated the stability and opportunities that came with being part of the Blackwood family, even as he harbored ambitions of forging his own path in the business world. Charming and adaptable, Callum seemed to ease into his role as stepson and brother with natural grace. As the family settled into their new dynamic, outsiders marveled at how seamlessly they had blended. Terrence and Lorelei were seen as pillars of the community, hosting charity events and involving themselves in local politics. Ivy and Callum's academic achievements were points of pride, held up as examples of the family's success. Yet behind closed doors, the careful balance of the Blackwood household teetered on a precarious edge. Unspoken desires, hidden resentments, and the weight of expectations created an atmosphere ripe for upheaval. As the summer heat intensified, so too did the tensions, building towards a crescendo that would shatter the illusion of their perfect life. July 15, 2023, dawned bright and oppressively humid in Maple Grove. The Blackwood household stirred to life with its usual morning rhythms, unaware that by nightfall, their lives would be irrevocably altered. Terrence rose early, his mind already racing with the day's agenda. A crucial meeting with investors was scheduled for the afternoon,
potentially opening doors for Blackwood Development's most ambitious project yet. As he knotted his tie with practiced precision, Lorelei entered their ensuite bathroom, her silk robe whispering against her skin. "Morning, darling," Lorelei murmured, pressing a kiss to Terrence's cheek. "Any plans for dinner tonight? I was thinking we could try that new Italian place in town." Terrence's reflection frowned slightly in the mirror. "I'm not sure when I'll be back," he replied. "This meeting could run late. Don't wait up for me." Lorelei's smile faltered for a moment before she recovered, years of modeling having trained her to maintain a pleasant facade. "Of course," she said lightly. "Another time, then." Downstairs, Ivy hunched over a bowl of cereal, her eyes glued to her phone as she scrolled through social media. She barely glanced up as her father entered the kitchen, grunting a perfunctory good morning. Callum, ever the early riser, had already left for his internship at a local marketing firm. His absence was noted by Terrence, who had been hoping to discuss some potential business connections that could benefit his stepson's budding career. As Terrence gathered his briefcase and car keys, he paused to kiss Lorelei goodbye. With that, he was gone, the sound of his car engine fading as he drove away. The day progressed without incident. Ivy left for her summer job at the local library, while Lorelei busied herself with household tasks and preparations for an upcoming charity event. The house settled into a quiet lull, the calm before an impending storm. It was just past 3 p.m. when Terrence's car unexpectedly pulled into the driveway. His meeting had concluded early, a rare occurrence that left him with mixed feelings of triumph and unease. The deal had been secured faster than anticipated, leaving him with an unfamiliar stretch of free time. As he entered the house, the silence struck him as odd. Lorelei's car was gone, likely out running errands. Terrence loosened his tie, deciding to use this unexpected free time to relax before sharing the good news with his family. His footsteps echoed through the empty hallway as he climbed the stairs, intent on changing into more comfortable clothes. As he approached the upper landing, a muffled sound caught his attention. It came from Ivy's room, a mix of whispers and what sounded unsettlingly like stifled laughter. Concern and curiosity warred within Terrence as he approached the door. He raised his hand to knock, but something held him back. The whispers grew more distinct, and with a jolt, Terrence realized there were two voices, one unmistakably male. Without conscious thought, his hand moved to the doorknob. In the split second before he turned it, a part of Terrence's mind screamed at him to stop, to walk away, to preserve the sanctity of trust between father and daughter. But that voice was drowned out by a rising tide of parental concern and an irrational surge of anger at the thought of some boy in his daughter's room. The door swung open. Time seemed to freeze as Terrence's mind struggled to process the scene before him. On Ivy's bed lay his daughter and stepson, their entangled limbs in state of undress, leaving no doubt as to the nature of their activities. For a heartbeat, the tableau held. Terrence in the doorway, his face a mask of shock and dawning rage. Ivy and Callum, their eyes wide with fear and guilt, scrambling to cover themselves. Then, like a dam bursting, chaos erupted. Terrence's world narrowed to a pinpoint of fury and betrayal. "What the hell is going on here?" he thundered, his eyes darting between Ivy and Callum, who were frantically pulling on discarded clothing. But Terrence was beyond explanations. He rounded on Callum, who stood frozen. "You," he snarled, jabbing a finger at his stepson's chest. "How dare you? In my house with my daughter." With a roar of incoherent rage, Terrence lunged at Callum, his hands closing around the young man's throat. They stumbled backwards, crashing into Ivy's desk, sending books and ornaments clattering to the floor. Ivy screamed, pleading with her father to stop, but her words fell on deaf ears. Terrence's world had contracted to this single act of violence, his fingers tightening as Callum's face turned an alarming shade of purple. In desperation, Callum's hand scrabbled across the desk, closing around a heavy crystal paperweight. With the last of his strength, he brought it crashing against the side of his stepfather's head. Terrence's grip loosened as he staggered, blood streaming from the gash on his temple. But the blow had only served to further enrage him. He tackled Callum to the ground. The two men grappled on the floor, a frenzied tangle of limbs and fury. In the chaotic struggle, Terrence's hand closed once more around Callum's throat. Blind with rage and bleeding profusely, he squeezed with all his might. Callum's struggles grew weaker, his eyes bulging as he gasped for air that wouldn't come. Ivy's screams faded to background noise as Terrence poured every ounce of his betrayal and anger into his grip. It wasn't until Callum's body went limp beneath him that the red mist began to clear from his vision. Slowly, horrifyingly, The reality of what he had done began to sink in. Terrence released his grip and scrambled backwards, his hands shaking uncontrollably as he stared at the motionless form of his stepson. The aftermath of Callum's death plunged the Blackwood household into a nightmare of panic, guilt, and desperate decision-making. Terrence, his clothes spattered with blood and his mind reeling, stared at the lifeless body of his stepson as Ivy's hysterical sobs filled the room. "We have to call the police," Ivy choked out between gasps, her hands shaking as she reached for her phone. Terrence cut her off, his tone shifting from shock to a cold, calculated calm that chilled Ivy to her core. "Listen to me very carefully," he said. "This was an accident, a terrible, tragic accident, but if the police come now, they won't see it that way. They'll destroy our family, our lives, everything we've built." Ivy stared at her father, barely recognizing the man before her. "What are you saying?" she whispered. "We need to clean this up," Terrence replied, his mind already racing through scenarios. "Your mother can never know what really happened here. Do you understand?" For a moment, Ivy looked as though she might refuse, but then, whether out of shock, fear, or some twisted sense of loyalty, she nodded. The next few hours passed in a blur of frantic activity. Terrence, drawing on skills he never knew he possessed, methodically erased all traces of the struggle from Ivy's room. Flood-stained carpets were torn up, furniture rearranged, and incriminating items bagged for disposal. Ivy, still in a state of shock, followed her father's instructions mechanically. She scrubbed surfaces, laundered clothes, and helped move Callum's body, wrapped in a tarp, to the garage. As twilight descended on Maple Grove, Terrence made a series of phone calls to his secretary, canceling all appointments for the next few days due to a family emergency. To Lorelei, his voice carefully modulated to convey concern rather than guilt, asking if she'd heard from Callum. To the local police, reporting his stepson missing, his tone a masterclass in worried parental concern. When Lorelei returned home, she found Terrence and Ivy seated in the living room, their faces grave. Terrence spun a tale of Callum storming out after an argument, of unanswered calls and growing worry. Ivy, her eyes red-rimmed from tears that were all too real, corroborated her father's story with a nod. As night fell, the Blackwood house became a hub of anxious activity. Friends and neighbors, alerted to Callum's disappearance, arrived with casseroles and words of support. Police officers came and went, taking statements and assuring the family that they were doing everything possible to locate the missing young man. Through it all, Terrence maintained his facade of concerned stepfather, his arm around a distraught Lorelei, his voice steady as he answered questions and thanked well-wishers. Only Ivy, watching her father with a mixture of fear and disbelief, knew the terrible truth that lay behind his performance. As the last visitors departed, and Lorelei finally succumbed to exhaustion, Terrence pulled Ivy aside. "Remember," he murmured, "this is to protect our family." Ivy, trapped in a nightmare of her own making, could only nod, sealing their pact of silence. As days stretched into weeks with no sign of the young man, the initial worry gave way to darker speculations. Detective Elias Thorne, a veteran of the police department, took charge of the investigation. A methodical and perceptive investigator, Thorne had seen his fair share of missing persons cases, but something about this one nagged at his instincts. His first formal interview with the Blackwood family took place in their immaculate living room, the atmosphere heavy with tension, barely masked by Southern hospitality. Lorelei, her eyes red-rimmed and hands clasping a barely touched cup of tea, recounted the last time she had seen her son. Thorne's gaze shifted to Terrence, noting the man's composed demeanor. "Mr. Blackwood, you reported having an argument with Callum the day he disappeared. Can you tell me more about that?" Terrence's response was measured, rehearsed to perfection in the dark hours of sleepless nights. "It was nothing serious," he explained. "Just a disagreement about Callum's career plans. I wanted him to consider joining the family business, but he was set on pursuing his own path. I may have pushed too hard." "And you, Miss Blackwood?" he asked, turning to Ivy. "Did you witness this argument?" Ivy, her face a mask of carefully cultivated grief, shook her head. "I was at work. When I got home, Callum was already gone." As the interview progressed, Thorne probed gently but persistently, noting the family's reactions. Lorelei's genuine distress, Terrence's controlled responses, and Ivy's withdrawn demeanor all painted a complex picture that the detective couldn't quite decipher. In the days that followed, Thorne and his team delved deeper into Callum's life,
They interviewed friends, colleagues from his internship, and even ex-girlfriends. A portrait emerged of a young man with ambition, charm, and no apparent reason to vanish without a trace. Yet as the investigation progressed, inconsistencies began to surface. Callum's phone records showed no outgoing calls or messages on the day of his disappearance. His car, found parked at a local trailhead, yielded no useful evidence. And most puzzlingly, none of his friends corroborated the story of plans to meet up on the day he vanished. As Detective Thorne pinned another lead to the growing caseboard in the precinct, he couldn't shake the feeling that the key to this mystery lay within the walls of their house. As weeks turned into months, the facade of normalcy at the Blackwood residence began to crack under the weight of their shared secret. Terrence threw himself into work with renewed vigor, his aggressive expansion of development raising eyebrows in local business circles. Lorelai's once vibrant social life withered as she retreated into a shell of grief and confusion. And Ivy, haunted by the dual specters of loss and complicity, withdrew from friends and studies alike. It was Ivy who first showed signs of breaking under the strain. Her nights were plagued by vivid nightmares, her days by a gnawing guilt that threatened to consume her. The sight of her father going about his life as if nothing had happened filled her with a mixture of awe and revulsion. One particularly bad night, after waking from a dream of Callum's accusing eyes, Ivy found herself in the kitchen, a glass of water trembling in her hand. She didn't hear Lorelai enter until her stepmother spoke, making her jump. "Can't sleep either?" Lorelai asked softly, her own face etched with the lines of chronic insomnia. Something in Lorelai's gentle tone, so reminiscent of Callum, broke through Ivy's carefully constructed walls. Before she could stop herself, words began to spill out. Disjointed at first, then in a torrent of confession. Lorelai listened, her face a canvas of shifting emotions, disbelief, horror, and finally a devastating understanding. When Ivy finally fell silent, tears streaming down her face, Lorelai did something unexpected. She pulled her stepdaughter into a tight embrace. "I knew," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "I knew about you and Callum. I should have said something, should have stopped it. This is my fault too." As dawn broke over Maple Grove, they made a pact of their own, to confront Terrence and bring the truth to light. Terrence's reaction to their united front was explosive, his carefully maintained composure shattered as he raged against their betrayal, his words a toxic mix of threats and pleas for understanding. It was in this moment of unguarded fury that Detective Thorne, arriving for a follow-up interview, overheard the damning confession through the open window of his unmarked car. The next few hours were a whirlwind of activity. Police swarmed the Blackwood residence, securing the scene and separating the family members for questioning. Terrence, realizing the game was up, retreated into stony silence, requesting a lawyer. Ivy and Lorelai, however, unburdened by their confession, provided full statements. As the truth came to light, the community of Maple Grove reeled from the revelations. The illicit relationship between step-siblings, Lorelai's silent knowledge, and Terrence's fatal outburst painted a picture of a family torn apart by secrets and lies. In the midst of the chaos, Detective Thorne focused on the grim task at hand. With Terrence's reluctant cooperation, Callum's body was recovered from its hasty grave in a remote wooded area. The discovery brought a measure of closure to Lorelai, even as it sealed the case against her husband. The case against Terrence Blackwood seemed airtight, built on physical evidence and corroborating testimonies. Yet, as the trial approached, a new development threatened to upend the prosecution's carefully constructed narrative. Amidst the mountain of evidence being processed, a forensics technician made a startling discovery. DNA found under Callum's fingernails didn't match Terrence's profile. Instead, it pointed to an unknown male contributor. This revelation sent shockwaves through the investigation. Detective Thorne, his certainty shaken, ordered a re-examination of all evidence. As the team delved deeper, more inconsistencies emerged. The angle of bruising on Callum's neck suggested a left-handed attacker, while Terrence was right-handed. Fibers found on the body didn't match those from the Blackwood home. Pressure mounted on the prosecution as these findings came to light. The defense, sensing an opportunity, pushed for all charges against Terrence to be dropped. However, the judge ruled that given the confessions and circumstantial evidence, the trial would proceed. Ivy and Lorelai, their united front beginning to crack under the strain of uncertainty, found themselves questioning their own memories of that fateful day. Had they been too quick to accept Terrence's guilt, blinded by their own complicity in the events leading up to Callum's death? As the trial date loomed, all parties involved grappled with the implications of this new information. The truth, it seemed, was far more complex than anyone had initially believed. In the courtroom, battle lines were drawn, with both prosecution and defense preparing to argue their interpretations of the increasingly convoluted evidence. The courtroom was packed on the day Terrence Blackwood was scheduled to take the stand. The air thrummed with tension as he was sworn in, his once commanding presence diminished by months in custody. As questioning began, Terrence's responses were measured, his demeanor calm, until the defense attorney broached the subject of the new DNA evidence. Terrence's composure cracked, his eyes darting to where Ivy sat in the gallery. In that moment, something seemed to break within him. To the shock of everyone present, he began to speak, his words pouring out in a torrent of confession, but not the one anyone expected. "I didn't kill Callum," Terrence declared, his voice raw with emotion, "but I am responsible for his death." He went on to describe the events of that day, but with a crucial difference. When he had walked in on Ivy and Callum, he admitted he had indeed been enraged, but it was Ivy, in a panic to protect her lover and their secret, who had lashed out violently. "I walked in and saw them together," Terrence recounted, his words echoing in the stunned silence of the courtroom. "I was angry, yes, but before I could even speak, Ivy grabbed the paperweight. She struck Callum again and again. By the time I pulled her off, it was too late." The courtroom erupted into chaos as Terrence described how, in a moment of paternal instinct, he had decided to protect his daughter. He had sent a hysterical Ivy to clean herself up, while he staged the scene to implicate himself, believing he could better weather the storm of a police investigation. "I never imagined it would go this far," he concluded, tears streaming down his face. "I was trying to protect my little girl, but I see now that I've destroyed us all." As Terrence's words hung in the air, all eyes turned to Ivy. Her face had drained of color, her body rigid with shock. When the judge asked if she had anything to say, she could only manage a barely audible whisper. "It's true." In the gallery, Lorelei collapsed into silent sobs, the full weight of her family's destruction finally too much to bear. Detective Thorne, his case shattered but his instincts vindicated, began the mental process of reconstructing the investigation. As Terrence was led from the stand, the courtroom remained in stunned silence, grappling with this final devastating twist in a case that had already defied expectations at every turn. The revelation of Ivy's culpability and Terrence's false confession threw the trial into disarray. The judge declared a mistrial, and both prosecution and defense scrambled to reassess their strategies in light of the new information. Ivy was immediately taken into custody, her bail hearing scheduled for the following week. The prosecution, caught off guard by the turn of events, requested time to review the evidence and potentially file new charges against both Ivy and Terrence. Ivy's defense team quickly began building a case around temporary insanity and crime of passion, emphasizing her youth and the shocking circumstances that led to her actions. They also didn't hesitate to shine a light on the questionable dynamics within the Blackwood household that had allowed the relationship between step-siblings to develop unchecked. The trials of Ivy Blackwood and Terrence Blackwood, though separate, were inextricably linked in the public consciousness. Ivy's trial came first, a somber affair that saw the once vibrant young woman appearing pale and withdrawn in the defendant's box. Her defense team, as planned, pursued a strategy of temporary insanity, bringing in expert witnesses to testify about the psychological impact of forbidden love and the fear of discovery. The prosecution painted a different picture, portraying Ivy as a calculating individual who had engaged in an illicit relationship and then committed murder to keep it hidden. They emphasized the brutality of the attack and Ivy's subsequent participation in the cover-up. Key testimony came from Lorelei, who spoke of her suspicions about Ivy and Callum's relationship and her regret at not intervening. Her words, delivered through tears, seemed to sway some jurors but alienate others who saw her inaction as complicity. After days of deliberation, the juries in both trials returned with their verdicts, bringing the legal saga of the Blackwood family to its conclusion. Ivy Blackwood was found guilty of second-degree murder, with the jury rejecting the insanity plea but acknowledging the crime's unpremeditated nature. The judge, taking into account Ivy's age and the unusual circumstances of the case, sentenced her to 18 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 12 years. Terrence Blackwood was found guilty on charges of obstruction of justice and filing a false report. The judge, noting the unique circumstances in Terrence's eventual confession, sentenced him to 5 years in prison, with 2 years suspended. As the Blackwoods were led from the courtroom for the last time, Maple Grove began the long process of healing and reflection, grappling with the knowledge that even in the most seemingly perfect communities, darkness can lurk behind closed doors. Emmett Dalton grew up the youngest of 3 siblings. His family owned a small hardware store, which had been in the Dalton family for generations. Emmett was always known as the gentle soul of the family, with a kind word for everyone and a willingness to help anyone in need. He had a close relationship with his parents, who cherished his thoughtful and considerate nature. In school, Emmett was not the most popular kid, but he was well-liked for his easygoing attitude and warm smile. He had a small circle of friends who appreciated his loyalty and sense of humor. After graduating high school, Emmett decided to stay in their home to help his parents run the hardware store. He enjoyed the simple life and found contentment in the routine of small-town living. Emmett's relationship with his family was solid. His older siblings had moved to nearby cities but frequently visited, maintaining a strong bond with their youngest brother. Emmett was particularly close to his sister Rachel, who often confided in him and sought his advice. His parents, though traditional in their ways, were supportive of Emmett and proud of the man he had become. Emmett had a few relationships, none of which were particularly serious. He was looking for someone who shared his values and appreciated the quiet life he enjoyed. Lila Renshaw was a strikingly beautiful woman with an air of mystery that captivated those around her. She grew up in the bustling city of Larkspur, a stark contrast to the quiet town. Lila's upbringing was far from idyllic. Her parents had a hard relationship, marked by frequent arguments and bouts of separation. As an only child, Lila often found herself caught in the middle of their conflicts, learning early on how to manipulate situations to her advantage. In her teenage years, Lila developed a reputation for being headstrong and manipulative. She had a string of relationships, each ending in turmoil due to her controlling nature. Lila thrived on power and control, often pushing her partners to the brink with her demanding and possessive behavior. Despite this, her charm and allure made it difficult for people to see her true nature until it was too late. After finishing high school, Lila moved to town in search of a fresh start. She quickly found a job at a local boutique, where her charisma and sales skills made her a favorite among customers. It was here that she met Emmett Dalton, a regular customer who was immediately taken by her beauty and confidence. To Lila, Emmett seemed like the perfect target, a kind, gentle man who was easy to control. Lila's past relationships had always followed a similar pattern. She would charm her way into her partner's life, gradually isolating them from their friends and family. Once she had established control, her true colors would show, leading to intense arguments and emotional manipulation. Her partners often felt trapped, unable to leave due to Lila's relentless grip on their lives. When Lila met Emmett, she saw him as another challenge, someone she could mold and control. She was drawn to his kindness and vulnerability, seeing them as weaknesses she could exploit. Emmett's trusting nature made it easy for Lila to weave her way into his life, slowly isolating him from those who cared about him. To the outside world, Lila and Emmett appeared to be a happy couple, but behind closed doors, a much darker story was unfolding. Emmett first met Lila on a warm summer afternoon at the local boutique. He was shopping for a birthday gift for his mother when Lila, with her striking looks and confident demeanor, offered to help him. Their interaction was brief, but left a lasting impression on Emmett. He couldn't stop thinking about her radiant smile and the way she seemed genuinely interested in helping him. A few days later, Emmett returned to the boutique, this time with the intention of asking Lila out. To his delight, she accepted, and they arranged to meet for coffee at a quaint cafe in town. Their first date was filled with laughter and easy conversation. Lila was charming and attentive, asking Emmett about his life, his family, and his dreams. Emmett felt an immediate connection, believing he had finally found someone who truly understood him. As their relationship progressed, Emmett's friends and family noticed how happy he seemed. Lila often joined him at family gatherings and social events, quickly becoming a familiar face in the community. She seemed to fit right in, and Emmett's parents were pleased to see their son so content. However, there were subtle changes in Emmett that only those closest to him noticed.
Lila's charm had a way of overshadowing her more manipulative tendencies. She began to subtly influence Emmett's decisions, steering him away from activities and people she deemed unnecessary. At first, it was small things, like suggesting they spend more time alone together or questioning the motives of his friends. Emmett, eager to please Lila and maintain the harmony of their relationship, often acquiesced to her demands. Lila was meticulous in her approach. She never directly forbade Emmett from seeing his friends or family, but she planted seeds of doubt in his mind. She would mention how certain friends didn't seem to appreciate him, or how his family was overly critical. Emmett, who had always been sensitive to others' opinions, began to internalize these suggestions, gradually distancing himself from his loved ones. Despite these changes, Emmett remained convinced that Lila was the best thing that had ever happened to him. He admired her confidence and believed that she had his best interests at heart. Lila, on the other hand, was pleased with how easily she had managed to isolate Emmett. She felt a sense of power knowing that she was the center of his world, controlling his actions and decisions. Their relationship continued to deepen, with Emmett becoming more dependent on Lila for emotional support and validation. Lila, aware of her influence, began to tighten her grip, ensuring that Emmett had little to no contact with anyone outside their relationship. To the outside world, they appeared to be a perfect couple, but behind closed doors, the dynamics were far more sinister. Emmett's once vibrant social life dwindled to nothing, leaving him isolated and completely under Lila's control. As the months passed, Lila's control over Emmett grew stronger. She employed subtle yet effective methods to isolate him from his family and friends, ensuring that he remained entirely dependent on her. It started with casual suggestions and offhand comments, but gradually, her tactics became more manipulative and deliberate. One evening, as Emmett prepared to meet his sister Rachel for dinner, Lila expressed concern about his family's influence on him. She mentioned how they always seemed to criticize their relationship and hinted that perhaps they didn't truly want him to be happy. Emmett, already sensitive to his family's opinions, began to doubt their intentions. He canceled the dinner, opting instead to stay home with Lila. Lila also made it a point to be present whenever Emmett received phone calls from friends or family. She would sit close by, making him uncomfortable and self-conscious about the conversation. Over time, Emmett's calls to his loved ones became less frequent as he grew tired of the tension it caused. His friends noticed his absence from social gatherings and reached out, but Lila always found a way to intercept their messages or make excuses for why Emmett couldn't attend. Lila's control extended to Emmett's daily routines and activities. She insisted on accompanying him everywhere, from grocery shopping to his volunteer work at the local community center. Emmett, eager to keep the peace, didn't resist. He began to feel suffocated, but he couldn't pinpoint the source of his discomfort. Lila's constant presence and influence made it difficult for him to think clearly or make decisions independently. One particularly telling incident occurred when Emmett's childhood friend, Leo, invited him on a weekend fishing trip. Emmett, excited about the prospect of reconnecting with Leo, shared the news with Lila. Her reaction was swift and intense. She questioned Leo's motives, suggesting that he was trying to pull Emmett away from their relationship. Lila accused Emmett of being inconsiderate, claiming that he was abandoning her for a frivolous outing. Emmett, caught off guard by her emotional outburst, reluctantly declined Leo's invitation. Lila's manipulation didn't stop there. She began to control Emmett's finances, convincing him to merge their bank accounts for convenience. This move further isolated Emmett, as he now had limited access to his own money. Lila monitored his spending closely, questioning every purchase and often overriding his decisions. Emmett felt increasingly powerless, unable to assert himself without facing Lila's wrath. Despite these red flags, Emmett continued to believe that Lila had his best interests at heart. He rationalized her behavior as a sign of her deep love and commitment to their relationship. However, the isolation took a toll on his mental and emotional well-being. He became withdrawn and anxious, struggling to reconcile his love for Lila with the growing sense of entrapment. Lila, sensing Emmett's inner turmoil, doubled down on her efforts to isolate him. She discouraged him from seeking help or confiding in others, framing it as a betrayal of their trust. Emmett, already emotionally fragile, complied. He cut off contact with the few remaining friends and family members he had left, fully entrusting his life to Lila's control. As the months turned into a year, Emmett's world became smaller and more confined. His once vibrant and fulfilling life was reduced to the narrow confines of his relationship with Lila. The community, unaware of the turmoil behind closed doors, continued to see them as a happy couple. Despite Lila's control, there were moments when he longed for the comfort and support of his family and friends. These flickers of desire for connection were met with resistance from Lila, who sensed that she was losing her grip on him. One afternoon, Emmett found himself standing outside the hardware store, reminiscing about the days when he would work alongside his father. He missed the camaraderie of the small community and the simple joys of his previous life. On an impulse, he decided to visit his parents, hoping for a moment of normalcy and perhaps a chance to explain his absence. When Emmett arrived at his parents' house, they were overjoyed to see him. His mother, Eleanor, embraced him tightly, her eyes filled with concern. His father, Thomas, greeted him with a firm handshake, his expression a mix of relief and worry. Emmett felt a surge of emotion as he sat down with his parents, who eagerly caught him up on family news and events. For a brief moment, Emmett felt like himself again, surrounded by the warmth and familiarity of his family. However, as the visit progressed, he could sense Lila's disapproval hanging over him like a dark cloud. She had called him multiple times during the visit, each call more insistent than the last. Emmett's parents noticed his unease and gently probed, asking if everything was all right. Emmett hesitated, but eventually confided in his parents about the strain he was feeling. He didn't go into detail about Lila's manipulative behavior, but he mentioned feeling overwhelmed and isolated. Eleanor and Thomas listened attentively, offering their support and urging Emmett to reach out more often. They assured him that he was always welcome and that they would help him in any way they could. Leaving his parents' house that day, Emmett felt a glimmer of hope. He resolved to reconnect with his family and friends, believing that their support would help him regain a sense of normalcy. However, when he returned home, Lila was waiting for him, her eyes cold and calculating. Lila's anger was palpable. She accused Emmett of betraying her trust and undermining their relationship. She framed his visit to his parents as a deliberate attempt to distance himself from her. Emmett, caught off guard by her intensity, tried to explain that he simply missed his family and needed their support. But Lila wouldn't hear of it. She berated him, using emotional manipulation to make him feel guilty and ashamed. The following days were a nightmare for Emmett. Lila's controlling behavior escalated, and she became more possessive and paranoid. She monitored his every move, checking his phone and questioning his whereabouts. Emmett felt trapped, unable to breathe under the suffocating weight of her control. Despite Lila's efforts, Emmett managed to reach out to his sister Rachel through discreet messages. Rachel, sensing her brother's distress, agreed to meet him in secret. They met at a secluded park, where Emmett poured out his heart, revealing the extent of Lila's manipulation and control. Rachel was horrified and immediately offered her support, vowing to help Emmett break free from Lila's grasp. Emmett's attempts to reconnect with his loved ones were fraught with challenges. Lila's influence was pervasive, and she used every tool at her disposal to maintain her control over him. However, the seeds of doubt had been planted in Emmett's mind. He began to see through Lila's facade, recognizing her manipulative tactics for what they were. The more he tried to reconnect with his family and friends, the more determined he became to regain his independence and escape from Lila's clutches. The tension between Emmett and Lila reached a boiling point one fateful evening. Emmett had been secretly meeting with his sister Rachel, seeking her support and advice on how to extricate himself from Lila's control. Rachel, deeply concerned for her brother's well-being, urged him to leave Lila and return to his family. Emmett, emboldened by his sister's encouragement, decided it was time to confront Lila and end their toxic relationship. Emmett chose a quiet Sunday afternoon to break the news to Lila. He hoped that the calmness of the day would help keep the situation from escalating. As they sat in their living room, Emmett took a deep breath and told Lila that he needed some space and time apart. He explained that he felt suffocated and isolated, and that he needed to reconnect with his family and friends to find himself again. Lila's reaction was immediate and explosive. She accused Emmett of being ungrateful and selfish, of abandoning the relationship they had built together. Her voice rose in anger, and she began to hurl insults and accusations, attempting to undermine Emmett's resolve. She claimed that his family and friends didn't truly care about him, that they only wanted to control him and pull him away from her.
Emmett tried to remain calm, but Lila's relentless tirade wore him down. He felt a mix of anger, guilt, and sadness as he listened to her venomous words. Despite her emotional manipulation, Emmett knew that he couldn't continue living under her control. He stood his ground, repeating his need for space and asserting that he was making the decision for his own well-being. Lila, realizing that her usual tactics were not working, shifted her approach. She broke down in tears, pleading with Emmett to reconsider. She promised to change, to give him more freedom, and to be more understanding. Emmett, seeing through her manipulative behavior, remained firm in his decision. He told her that he needed to leave, and that it was the best thing for both of them. The atmosphere in the room grew tense and charged with emotion. Lila's tears quickly turned to anger again, and she lashed out, accusing Emmett of cheating and betrayal. Emmett, exhausted and emotionally drained, decided to leave the house for a while to clear his head. He grabbed his jacket and walked out the door, leaving Lila seething with rage. When Emmett finally returned home, he found Lila waiting for him, her eyes red and swollen from crying. She approached him with a calm demeanor, apologizing for her outburst and begging for another chance. Emmett, though sympathetic to her pain, stood his ground and reiterated his need for space. That night, as Emmett tried to sleep, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. Lila's behavior had become increasingly erratic, and he feared that her desperation might drive her to do something drastic. His instincts were correct. In the early hours of the morning, Emmett was awakened by a noise in the living room. He got up to investigate and found Lila sitting on the couch, clutching a large kitchen knife. Her eyes were wild with desperation and anger. Emmett's heart raced as he tried to talk her down, but Lila's mind was made up. She accused Emmett of ruining her life, of turning everyone against her. In a fit of rage, she lunged at him with the knife. Emmett managed to dodge her initial attack, but Lila was relentless. A struggle ensued, with Emmett trying to disarm Lila while avoiding her frantic swings. In the chaos, Lila's grip on the knife slipped, and Emmett seized the opportunity to wrest it from her hand. In the aftermath of the struggle, both were left breathless and shaken. Emmett, now holding the knife, dropped it and stepped back, giving Lila space to calm down. Realizing the gravity of the situation, Emmett knew he had to leave. He quickly packed a bag and, without looking back, walked out of the house, leaving Lila behind. He drove to his parents' home, where he was welcomed with open arms, as he told them everything that just happened. Emmett knew that the road to recovery would be long and difficult, but he was ready to take the first step. Lila, consumed by a mix of rage and despair, couldn't accept the loss of control over Emmett. Her mind raced with thoughts of revenge and retribution. She felt humiliated and abandoned, and her desperation turned into a dangerous resolve. In the days following Emmett's departure, Lila's behavior became increasingly insane. She spent hours pacing the house, plotting ways to regain control over Emmett. Her anger festered, and she began to see his decision to leave as an unforgivable betrayal. Lila convinced herself that Emmett's family and friends were to blame for his decision, and she resolved to make him pay for abandoning her. One evening, as Emmett was visiting his parents, Lila devised a plan. She knew that Emmett often took a walk through a secluded part of town in the evenings to clear his head. She decided to confront him there, away from prying eyes. Armed with the same kitchen knife from their previous altercation, Lila set out to intercept Emmett. As Emmett approached a secluded park, he was startled to see Lila standing there, her eyes fixed on him. He stopped in his tracks, a mix of fear and sadness washing over him. Lila's appearance was disheveled, and her eyes burned with a dangerous intensity. Emmett knew that this confrontation could not end well. Lila's voice was cold and menacing, as she accused Emmett of ruining her life. She blamed him for her misery and demanded that he return to her. Emmett tried to reason with her, explaining that their relationship was toxic and that he needed to move on for his own well-being. But Lila was beyond reason. In a sudden violent outburst, Lila lunged at Emmett with the knife. Emmett tried to defend himself, but Lila's rage gave her a frightening strength. A struggle ensued, with Emmett desperately trying to disarm her. In the chaos, Lila managed to stab Emmett, the blade piercing his side. Emmett cried out in pain, but Lila showed no signs of stopping. As Emmett fell to the ground, clutching his wound, Lila stood over him, her face contorted with fury and madness. Emmett, weakened and bleeding, pleaded with her to stop, but his words fell on deaf ears. Lila, consumed by her desire for control and revenge, delivered a final fatal blow. The once peaceful park was now a crime scene, with Emmett lying lifeless on the ground. Lila, covered in his blood, stood there for a moment, her mind slowly registering the reality of what she had done. Realizing that she couldn't stay there, Lila fled the scene, leaving Emmett's body behind. She drove aimlessly through the night, her mind racing with thoughts of escape. She knew that it was only a matter of time before the police would come looking for her. The next morning, Emmett's body was discovered by a passerby who immediately called the police. The murder of Emmett Dalton sent shockwaves through the community, a town unaccustomed to such violence. The local police, led by Detective Samuel Carter, launched a thorough investigation to uncover the truth behind Emmett's tragic death. As the news spread, the tight-knit community rallied around Emmett's family, offering support and demanding justice. Detective Carter, a seasoned investigator with a reputation for solving complex cases, began his work by examining the crime scene. The secluded park where Emmett's body was found offered little in the way of witnesses, but the brutality of the attack indicated a crime of passion. The wounds on Emmett's body suggested a frenzied assault, pointing to someone who knew him well. The investigation quickly focused on Lila Renshaw, Emmett's estranged girlfriend. Neighbors and acquaintances described their tumultuous relationship, with several recounting instances of Lila's controlling behavior. Emmett's family provided crucial insights into the couple's recent conflicts and Emmett's attempts to distance himself from Lila. These testimonies painted a picture of a relationship marked by manipulation, culminating in a fatal confrontation. Detective Carter and his team conducted a thorough search of Lila's home, uncovering several pieces of incriminating evidence. They found Emmett's blood on Lila's clothing and the kitchen knife used in the attack hidden in a drawer. Lila's phone records showed multiple calls to Emmett on the night of the murder, further implicating her in the crime. As the evidence mounted, the police issued an arrest warrant for Lila. She was located in a rundown motel on the outskirts of town, attempting to evade capture. When the police arrived, Lila offered little resistance, her demeanor one of resignation. The trial was a highly publicized event, drawing attention from the local community. Emmett's family attended every session, their presence a poignant reminder of the loss they had suffered. The prosecution presented a compelling case, detailing Lila's manipulative behavior and the violent nature of the crime. Witnesses testified about Lila's possessiveness and her efforts to isolate Emmett from his loved ones. Lila's defense team attempted to portray her as a victim of circumstance, arguing that she had acted in a moment of emotional turmoil. However, the overwhelming evidence, coupled with Lila's lack of remorse, left little room for doubt. The jury deliberated for only a few hours before returning a guilty verdict. Lila was sentenced to life in prison, without the possibility of parole. Her conviction brought a sense of closure to Emmett's family, though the pain of their loss would never fully heal. The community mourned the senseless death of one of its own, grappling with the realization that such darkness could exist in their midst. The story of Emmett Dalton and Lila Renshaw became a lasting reminder of the importance of recognizing and addressing the signs of abuse. It highlighted the need for community support and the power of collective action in creating a safer world for everyone. On October 15, 2021, police responded to a distress call from an apartment complex on Oak Street. What they discovered inside would haunt them for years to come: the lifeless body of 32-year-old Ethan Reed, a beloved local high school teacher, lying in a pool of his own blood. The prime suspect? His girlfriend of 2 years, 29-year-old software engineer Olivia Rogan. As investigators delved deeper into the case, they uncovered a disturbing web of surveillance, manipulation, and escalating control that had ensnared Ethan in the months leading up to his death. Hidden cameras, meticulously placed throughout his apartment, told a silent tale of paranoia and obsession. Olivia Rogan's path to becoming the central figure in a tragic true crime story began long before she met Ethan Reed. Born in 1993 to Margaret and James Rogan, Olivia grew up in a middle-class suburb of Portland. From an early age, those close to the family noted Olivia's intense need for attention and validation. Margaret Rogan, in an interview following her daughter's arrest, reflected on Olivia's childhood. She was an exceptionally bright child, always at the top of her class, but she struggled to form lasting friendships. Margaret recalled, "I thought it was just shyness at first, but as she got older I noticed how possessive she could be of the few friends she did make. If they spent time with other children, Olivia would become sullen and withdrawn." This pattern continued into Olivia's teenage years. Her high school boyfriend, Alex Chen, later told investigators about Olivia's constant need to know his whereabouts. "She would call or text incessantly when we weren't together," he said. "If I didn't respond quickly enough, she'd show up wherever she thought I might be. At the time, I thought it was just because she cared so much." Despite these interpersonal challenges, Olivia excelled academically. She graduated as valedictorian of her high school class and went on to study computer science at Stanford University. It was here that Olivia's controlling tendencies found a new outlet in the world of technology. Her college roommate, Sarah Jennings, remembered Olivia's fascination with coding and surveillance software. "She was brilliant at it," Sarah said, "but sometimes it felt like she was using her skills to keep tabs on everyone around her. She'd casually mention things about our classmates that she couldn't possibly have known without some kind of digital snooping." After graduating with honors, Olivia landed a prestigious job at a tech startup. Her colleagues described her as driven and meticulous, often working long hours to perfect her code. However, her personal life continued to be marked by tumultuous, short-lived relationships. Jason Tran, who dated Olivia for 6 months in 2019, described the relationship as intense and suffocating. "She wanted to know everything about my day, my thoughts, my plans," he said. "When I tried to set boundaries, she'd become angry or manipulative. It was exhausting." By the time Olivia moved back to Ashland in early 2020, accepting a remote position with her company, she had left a trail of broken relationships behind her. Yet those who knew her couldn't have predicted the dark turn her life would take when she met Ethan Reed. Ethan Reed's life stood in stark contrast to Olivia's tumultuous journey. Born in 1990 in Ashland, Ethan was the youngest of 3 children in a close-knit family. His older sister, Amanda Reed, described their childhood as idyllic. "We grew up surrounded by nature, spending our summers hiking in the mountains and our winters skiing. Ethan was always the peacemaker, the one who could make anyone laugh." From an early age, Ethan showed a passion for learning and a natural ability to connect with others. His high school English teacher, Mrs. Elaine Hoffman, remembered him fondly. "Ethan had a way of bringing out the best in his classmates. He was patient, kind, and had an infectious enthusiasm for literature. I always thought he'd make an excellent teacher someday." Mrs. Hoffman's prediction proved accurate. After graduating from the university with a degree in English literature, Ethan returned to his hometown to teach at Ashland High School. Ethan's personal life was characterized by steady, long-term relationships. His college girlfriend, Laura Simmons, remained a close friend even after their amicable breakup. "Ethan was always so balanced," she said. "He valued his independence, but was also incredibly loyal and supportive. We broke up because our career paths were taking us in different directions, but there was never any drama." The fateful meeting between Olivia Rogan and Ethan Reed occurred on a sunny Saturday afternoon in May 2020 at a local farmer's market. Olivia, still adjusting to life, had ventured out to explore her new surroundings. Ethan, a regular at the market, was picking up fresh produce for the week. Their eyes met across a display of organic apples, and Ethan, ever the friendly local, struck up a conversation about the best varieties for baking. Olivia, charmed by his easygoing nature and warm smile, found herself lingering at the stall far longer than she'd intended. As they chatted, they discovered a shared love of classic literature and hiking. Ethan, impressed by Olivia's quick wit and intelligence, suggested they meet up for a hike the following weekend. Olivia, feeling an instant connection, eagerly agreed. Their first date was a hike up to Grizzly Peak, offering breathtaking views of the Rogue Valley. Ethan's friend Mark later recalled, "Ethan came back from that hike on cloud 9. He couldn't stop talking about how smart and funny Olivia was, how they'd talked for hours without a lull in the conversation." Over the next few weeks, Olivia and Ethan's relationship blossomed rapidly. They spent long evenings discussing books, sharing meals, and exploring the natural beauty of southern area. To those around them, they seemed like a perfect match. However, even in these early honeymoon days of their relationship, there were subtle signs of Olivia's possessive nature. Ethan's sister Amanda noticed that Olivia seemed to monopolize his time. She'd call or text constantly when they weren't together,
and she always seemed to have a reason why Ethan couldn't join family gatherings without her. Ethan, blinded by the excitement of new love, brushed off these early red flags. When his friend Mark expressed concern about the intensity of the relationship, Ethan laughed it off. "She's just excited about us," he said. "It'll calm down once we're more settled." Little did Ethan know that this was just the beginning of a pattern that would gradually tighten around him, slowly cutting him off from the life he had built and the people who cared about him most. By the fall of 2020, Olivia had all but moved into Ethan's apartment. Despite him never officially asking her to live with him, she began to exert influence over every aspect of his daily life, from what he ate to how he spent his free time. Ethan's colleague and friend, fellow English teacher Jessica Lawson, noticed changes in his behavior at work. He started turning down invitations to after-school happy hours, something he'd always enjoyed before. When I asked him about it, he said Olivia wasn't comfortable with him being out late, Jessica recalled. It seemed odd, given that she knew most of us and had even joined us a few times. Olivia's control extended to Ethan's social media presence. Friends noticed that his usually active Facebook and Instagram accounts became sparse, with posts becoming infrequent and impersonal. When questioned, Ethan would brush it off, saying he was trying to be more private online. But it was Olivia's attempts to isolate Ethan from his family that raised the most alarm bells. Amanda Reed remembered a particularly disturbing incident during the 2020 holiday season. "We always have a big family Christmas at our parents' house," she said. For that year, Ethan called at the last minute to say he and Olivia couldn't make it. When I pressed him, he said Olivia wasn't feeling well and he needed to stay with her. But I could hear her in the background, sounding perfectly fine. Olivia employed a variety of emotional manipulation tactics to maintain her grip on Ethan. She would oscillate between lavishing him with affection and subjecting him to cold, silent treatments if he didn't comply with her wishes. Ethan's friend Mark recounted a camping trip they had planned for months. "The night before we were supposed to leave, Ethan called to cancel. He sounded so defeated. He said Olivia was upset he was going away without her, even though she'd been invited and had declined." As 2021 progressed, Olivia's behavior became more erratic. She began accusing Ethan of infidelity, despite having no evidence to support her claims. She would show up unannounced at the high school, ostensibly to bring Ethan lunch. But colleagues noted how she seemed to be scanning the room, as if looking for signs of inappropriate behavior. Ethan's student Emma Chen later testified to a disturbing encounter. "Ms. Rogan came into our classroom during lunch break. Mr. Reed wasn't there, but she stayed anyway, asking us questions about him. It felt really weird and invasive." Despite the mounting evidence of Olivia's controlling behavior, Ethan remained committed to the relationship. Those close to him noted his increasing stress and anxiety, but he would deflect their concerns, often making excuses for Olivia's actions. His sister Amanda confronted him directly in the summer of 2021. "I told him I was worried, that this didn't seem like a healthy relationship," she said. But he just got defensive. He said I didn't understand Olivia, that she'd been hurt in the past and needed extra reassurance. He truly believed he could help her overcome her insecurities. As Olivia's paranoia and need for control reached new heights, she made a decision that would irreversibly alter the course of her relationship with Ethan and ultimately lead to its tragic conclusion. In late August 2021, while Ethan was away at a weekend teaching conference, Olivia took the drastic step of installing hidden cameras throughout his apartment. The idea had been brewing in Olivia's mind for weeks. Her background in software engineering made the technical aspects of the plan feasible, and her growing suspicions about Ethan's fidelity provided the justification she needed to overcome any moral qualms. Olivia meticulously planned the operation, purchasing small high-definition cameras disguised as everyday objects, a smoke detector, a phone charger, even a potted plant. She also set up sophisticated software that would allow her to access the feeds remotely from her laptop or phone. On the Friday afternoon that Ethan left for his conference, Olivia sprang into action. She had a key to his apartment, ostensibly for emergencies, which gave her unfettered access. Over the next several hours, she carefully placed cameras in the living room, kitchen, bedroom, and even the bathroom, ensuring every corner of Ethan's private space was under surveillance. With the cameras in place and the software running smoothly, Olivia left the apartment, her heart racing with a mixture of anticipation and guilt. She told herself that this was a necessary step, that it would allay her fears and allow her to trust Ethan completely. The first few days of monitoring proved uneventful. Olivia watched as Ethan went about his daily routines, grading papers, preparing lessons, chatting on the phone with his sister. But rather than easing her suspicions, the lack of incriminating evidence only fueled Olivia's paranoia. She began to obsess over minor details. Why did Ethan smile at that text message? Who was he waving to out the window? Olivia's colleague, David Cho, later recalled noticing changes in her behavior at work during this time. She seemed distracted, constantly checking her phone. I caught a glimpse of her screen once. It looked like a video feed, but she quickly closed it when she saw me looking. As the days turned into weeks, Olivia's obsession with the camera feeds grew. She began neglecting her work, her sleep suffered, and her interactions with Ethan became increasingly strained as she struggled to keep her secret. One evening, while reaching for a book on his shelf, Ethan noticed that several volumes were slightly out of place. He distinctly remembered organizing them just days before. In the bathroom, his toiletries seemed rearranged, though he couldn't pinpoint exactly how. More unsettling were the times he felt as if he was being watched. He'd be grading papers in the living room and suddenly feel a prickle on the back of his neck, as if someone's eyes were on him. But when he looked up, he was alone. Ethan's friend and fellow teacher, Jessica Lawson, recalled a conversation they had during this period. He mentioned feeling on edge in his own home, she said. He laughed it off, saying he was probably just stressed about work, but I could tell it was really bothering him. Olivia's behavior added to Ethan's growing discomfort. She began making comments about his daily activities that she shouldn't have known about. Once, she mentioned in passing that she liked the new brand of coffee he'd bought, despite not having been to his apartment in days. Another time, she asked about a phone call he'd had with his mother, though he was certain he hadn't mentioned it to her. When Ethan would express confusion about these slip-ups, Olivia would quickly change the subject or provide vague explanations. He must have mentioned the coffee in passing, she'd say, or perhaps his mother had told her about the call. As his unease grew, Ethan found himself second-guessing his own memories and perceptions. Am I just being paranoid? He wondered. Is the stress of work getting to me? Despite his attempts to rationalize the strange occurrences, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong. He began to pay closer attention to his surroundings, noting any changes or oddities in his apartment. He even considered confiding in his sister Amanda, but hesitated, worried that his suspicions might sound absurd or that he might be overreacting. The moment of revelation came on an October evening in 2021. Ethan had been grading papers late into the night, the soft glow of his laptop illuminating the living room. As he stretched and prepared to call it a night, his elbow knocked a small potted plant off the side table. The pot shattered on the hardwood floor, soil and ceramic shards scattering across the room. As Ethan knelt to clean up the mess, something caught his eye amidst the debris. A tiny lens, no bigger than a pencil eraser, glinted in the low light. His heart racing, Ethan carefully extracted the object from the soil. It was a miniature camera, expertly concealed within the plant's base. The discovery sent a chill down Ethan's spine. With trembling hands, he began a frantic search of his apartment. Over the next hour, he uncovered 5 more hidden cameras. In the smoke detector, a picture frame, even the shower head. The realization that his most private moments had been under surveillance was overwhelming. Ethan's mind reeled as he pieced together the implications. The strange comments Olivia had made, her uncanny knowledge of his daily activities, the feeling of being watched, it all suddenly made horrifying sense. The woman he had loved and trusted had violated his privacy in the most intimate way possible. In a daze, Ethan called the one person he knew he could trust implicitly, his sister Amanda. It was past midnight, but she answered on the second ring, immediately alert at the sound of distress in her brother's voice. "Ethan, what's wrong?" she asked, concern evident in her tone. Through a voice choked with emotion, Ethan recounted his discovery. Amanda listened in shocked silence, her initial disbelief quickly turning to anger on her brother's behalf. As Ethan's story unfolded, Amanda's protective instincts kicked in. "You need to get out of there," she insisted. "Pack a bag and come to my place. We'll figure this out together." But Ethan was torn. Part of him wanted to confront Olivia immediately, to demand answers and explanations. Another part was simply numb with betrayal, struggling to reconcile the woman he thought he knew with someone capable of such a gross invasion of privacy. In the end, it was Amanda's steady voice that guided his next actions. "Document everything," she advised. "Take pictures of the cameras. Save any recordings you can find. We'll go to the police in the morning.
As the first light of dawn broke over Ashland, Ethan sat on his couch, surrounded by the dismantled remains of Olivia's surveillance network. His phone buzzed with a text from Olivia. "Good morning, babe. Sleep well?" The irony of her feigned normalcy was not lost on Ethan. With a deep breath, he typed out a response that would set in motion the final tragic act of their relationship.
"We need to talk. Come over as soon as you can." The tension in Ethan's apartment was palpable as Olivia arrived later that morning. She entered with her usual smile, leaning in for a kiss, but froze when she saw Ethan's grim expression and the array of dismantled cameras on the coffee table. For a moment, silence hung heavy in the air. Then Olivia's face crumpled, tears welling in her eyes. "Ethan, I can explain," she began, her voice quavering. But Ethan, his voice low and controlled, cut her off. He spoke of trust betrayed, of the sanctity of privacy violated. With each word, Olivia seemed to shrink, her usual confidence evaporating in the face of her exposed deception. When Ethan finally fell silent, Olivia launched into a desperate justification of her actions. She spoke of her deep-seated insecurities, her fear of losing him, her conviction that if she could just prove to herself that he was faithful, she could finally relax into their relationship. Her words came out in a rush, pleading and explanatory, but Ethan remained unmoved. "I can't be with someone who would do this," he said firmly. "We're done, Olivia. I want you to leave." Olivia's demeanor changed in an instant. Her tears dried up, replaced by a cold, hard look. "You can't do this to me," she hissed. "We're perfect together. You're overreacting." As Ethan stood firm in his decision, Olivia's pleas turned to threats. She spoke of ruining his career, of telling his students and colleagues about embarrassing moments she'd captured on camera. When these threats failed to sway Ethan, she resorted to emotional manipulation, threatening self-harm if he left her. Throughout it all, Ethan remained resolute. Even as his heart broke at the sight of Olivia's desperation, he knew with a clarity that surprised him that there was no coming back from this betrayal. Finally, seeing that her words were having no effect, Olivia stormed out of the apartment, slamming the door behind her. Ethan sank onto the couch, emotionally exhausted. He thought the worst was over. He had no idea that Olivia's desperation was about to take a far more dangerous turn. The events of October 15th, 2021, would forever be etched in the memories of Ashland's residents. The day began like any other, with no indication of the tragedy that would unfold. Ethan, emotionally drained from the confrontation with Olivia, had called in sick to work. He spent the morning talking with his sister Amanda, making plans to file a police report about the hidden cameras. As evening approached, he decided to take a walk to clear his head, leaving his phone behind to avoid any desperate messages from Olivia. It was during this absence that Olivia made her final fatal return to Ethan's apartment. Neighbors would later report seeing her enter the building, her face set in a mask of determination. She used her key to let herself in, her mind racing with a mix of anger, desperation, and a twisted sense of righteous indignation. When Ethan returned home around 7 p.m., he found Olivia waiting for him in the darkened living room. The sight of her there, uninvited and unexpected, sent a jolt of fear through him. "Olivia, what are you doing here?" he asked, his voice wary. Olivia's response was chilling in its calmness. "We're going to fix this, Ethan," she said. "You'll see that we belong together." What followed was a heated argument that quickly spiraled out of control. Olivia vacillated between pleading for another chance and lashing out with bitter accusations. Ethan, his patience exhausted, demanded that she leave immediately. It was then that Olivia's fragile control snapped. In a move that would shock even those who knew of her obsessive tendencies, she produced a kitchen knife she had taken from Ethan's own drawer. The next few moments were a blur of violence and terror. Ethan, caught off guard by the sudden escalation, tried to reason with Olivia, even as he backed away from the blade. But Olivia, beyond the reach of reason, lunged forward. In the struggle that ensued, Ethan's training as a former high school wrestler came into play. He managed to grapple with Olivia, trying to disarm her without causing harm. But in her frenzied state, Olivia's strength seemed superhuman. Neighbors would later report hearing shouts and the sound of breaking glass. One, concerned by the commotion, called 911, but help would arrive too late. By the time police broke down the door of Ethan's apartment, the tragic scene had already played out to its grim conclusion. They found Ethan on the floor with multiple stab wounds marking his body, the life already fading from his eyes. Olivia sat beside him, the bloody knife still clutched in her hand, her gaze vacant as she stared at what she had done. As paramedics rushed in, futilely attempting to save Ethan's life, Olivia offered no resistance when the police took her into custody. Her only words, repeated over and over like a mantra, were, "He was supposed to love me forever." The investigation, led by Detective Sarah Nguyen of the Ashland Police Department, quickly uncovered the full extent of Olivia's surveillance operation, revealing months of invasive monitoring. This digital trail, along with physical evidence from the crime scene and witness statements, painted a damning picture of obsession and premeditated violence. Ethan's family and friends were devastated. His sister Amanda in particular struggled with guilt. "I knew something was wrong," she said in a tearful interview. "I should have pushed harder, done more to get him away from her." As the investigation progressed, more details of Olivia's troubled past came to light. Former colleagues and ex-boyfriends came forward with stories of her controlling behavior and emotional manipulation. Her parents, shell-shocked by their daughter's actions, could only offer tearful apologies to Ethan's family. The district attorney presented a methodical case, walking the jury through the progression of Olivia's obsessive behavior. The recovered surveillance footage played a central role, starkly illustrating the invasion of Ethan's privacy. The defense didn't contest the basic facts of the case. Instead, they focused on Olivia's mental state, bringing in expert witnesses to testify about her history of attachment issues and borderline personality disorder. They argued that Olivia's actions were the result of a mental health crisis, not premeditated murder. Olivia herself took the stand, her testimony an unsettling mixture of remorse and rationalization. She spoke of her deep love for Ethan and her fear of abandonment, claiming that she never meant to hurt him. Her apparent lack of full comprehension of the gravity of her actions left many in the courtroom disturbed. After a 2-week trial and 3 days of deliberation, the jury returned a guilty verdict on charges of first-degree murder. At the sentencing hearing, the judge delivered a scathing indictment of Olivia's actions before sentencing her to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As Ashland slowly healed, the community was left to reflect on the nature of love, trust, and the human capacity for both compassion and cruelty. The case would be remembered not just for its shocking conclusion, but as a catalyst for change and a somber reminder of the importance of recognizing and addressing toxic relationship dynamics before they escalate to tragedy. Andrew and Paula Keene's love story began like many others in Pinewood, at the annual Harvest Festival 15 years earlier. Andrew, then a shy graduate student, had volunteered to run the physics demonstration booth. Paula, home from college for the weekend, found herself captivated by his passionate explanation of physics. Their courtship was a whirlwind of outdoor adventures and cozy evenings, discussing their dreams for the future. Paula was drawn to Andrew's quiet intensity and brilliant mind, while Andrew was in awe of Paula's confidence and zest for life. They married 2 years later in a simple ceremony by Pinewood Lake, their vows echoing off the surrounding mountains as friends and family cheered. The early years of their marriage were filled with the joy of building a life together. They bought a charming craftsman-style home on Maple Street, its wrap-around porch soon cluttered with Paula's collection of potted herbs and Andrew's telescope. Weekends were spent hiking the nearby trails or hosting game nights with their growing circle of friends. To the outside world, the Keenes appeared to be the perfect couple, supportive, affectionate, and deeply in sync. But as time passed, small fissures began to appear in their relationship. Paula's career in marketing took off, bringing with it late nights at the office and frequent business trips. Andrew, content with his position as a high school teacher, struggled to understand his wife's drive for professional success. He began to feel left behind, his world shrinking as Paula's expanded. Their conversations, once flowing freely, became stilted and superficial. Paula found herself frustrated by Andrew's reluctance to try new experiences or socialize outside their established routines. Andrew, in turn, felt increasingly inadequate in the face of Paula's vibrant social life and career achievements. Attempts to rekindle their connection often fell flat. A romantic getaway to the Oregon coast ended in tense silence as they realized how little they now had in common. Date nights became an exercise in checking boxes rather than genuinely connecting. Even their physical intimacy waned, with both making excuses to avoid the awkwardness of forced passion. It was in this fragile state that Paula Keene first crossed paths with David Reeves, setting in motion a chain of events that would shatter the delicate equilibrium of their marriage and lead to consequences neither could have imagined. The seeds of Paula and David's affair were planted on a rainy Tuesday afternoon at the Pinewood Business Association mixer. Paula, representing her marketing firm, found herself drawn to the charismatic newcomer who spoke passionately about revitalizing the town's visual branding. David's enthusiasm was infectious, and Paula soon realized an hour had passed in what felt like minutes. Over the following weeks, their paths continued to cross professionally. Paula's firm hired David for a series of projects, necessitating frequent meetings and collaboration. What began as a working relationship quickly evolved into a friendship, with shared lunches extending well beyond the allotted hour as they discovered a mutual love for contemporary art and obscure indie films. Paula found herself looking forward to their interactions, feeling a spark of excitement she hadn't experienced in years. David's attentiveness and genuine interest in her thoughts made her feel seen in a way she had long forgotten. For his part, David was captivated by Paula's quick wit and the passion that shone through when she spoke about her work. The line between professional and personal blurred one evening after a particularly successful presentation to a client. Flush with victory, Paula and David decided to celebrate with drinks at a bar on the outskirts of town. As the night wore on and inhibitions lowered, their conversation turned more intimate. David's hand brushed against Paula's, lingering a moment too long to be accidental. It was Paula who made the first move, leaning in to kiss David as they stood in the parking lot. The kiss, fueled by alcohol and long-suppressed desire, quickly deepened. Their first clandestine rendezvous took place at a small bed and breakfast in the next town over. As they fell into each other's arms, all thoughts of consequences faded away. In the afterglow, tangled in rumpled sheets, Paula and David convinced themselves that what they had found was too precious to give up, and so began a careful dance of stolen moments and secret meetings, each rendezvous adding another layer to the web of deceit that would ultimately ensnare them all. For months, Andrew Keene remained blissfully unaware of his wife's infidelity. He attributed Paula's improved mood and renewed energy to a positive shift in her work life. However, as winter gave way to spring, small inconsistencies began to gnaw at the edges of his consciousness. It started with little things: Paula's sudden interest in obscure bands she'd never mentioned before, hushed phone conversations that abruptly ended when he entered the room, and an inexplicable nervousness whenever plans changed unexpectedly. Andrew initially dismissed these observations, not wanting to acknowledge the growing unease in the pit of his stomach. The pivotal moment came on a quiet Sunday afternoon. Paula had left her laptop open on the kitchen counter, and as Andrew reached past it to grab a mug, a notification flashed across the screen. The message preview from an unsaved number read, "Can't wait to see you tomorrow. Last time was..." Andrew's hand froze mid-air. He knew he shouldn't look, that doing so would violate Paula's privacy. But the seed of suspicion, once planted, grew rapidly. With trembling fingers, he opened the message thread. What he found confirmed his worst fears. Months of intimate exchanges, thinly veiled references to secret meetings, and declarations of passion scrolled before his eyes. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place when he saw a photo David had sent. Nauseated and shaking, Andrew closed the laptop and retreated to the basement, his mind reeling. When Paula returned home that evening, she found him sitting in the dark, his eyes red-rimmed and distant. The confrontation that followed was brutal in its rawness. Paula, caught off guard, initially tried to deny everything, but faced with the evidence Andrew had discovered, she finally broke down and confessed to the affair. As Paula sobbed and attempted to explain, Andrew listened in stony silence. When she finished, he stood up and walked out of the room without a word, leaving Paula alone with the wreckage of their marriage strewn around her. In the days following his devastating discovery, Andrew Keene surprised everyone with his apparent, calm acceptance of the situation. When Paula, racked with guilt, offered to move out, Andrew insisted she stay. He spoke of forgiveness, of working through their issues together, and of his enduring love for her despite her transgression. Paula, overwhelmed with relief at this unexpected reprieve, threw herself into rebuilding their relationship. She ended things with David in a terse phone call, blocking his number and social media accounts. She suggested couples therapy, date nights, and even a second honeymoon to rekindle their connection. To their friends and colleagues, the Keenes presented a united front, They were seen holding hands at the farmer's market, laughing together at local events, and Andrew even surprised Paula with flowers at her office. Many in Pinewood commented on how the couple seemed stronger than ever, admiring their ability to weather such a storm. But beneath this carefully constructed facade, a very different reality was unfolding. Andrew's forgiveness was a masterful performance, concealing a heart twisted by betrayal and a mind consumed by thoughts of revenge. Each gentle word and loving gesture was calculated, designed to lull Paula into a false sense of security while he grappled with his growing obsession. Late at night, while Paula slept, Andrew would lie awake, his mind replaying imagined scenes of his wife in David's arms. He began keeping a journal, filling pages with dark musings and elaborate fantasies of confronting his wife's lover. The act of writing these thoughts became a pressure valve, allowing him to maintain his cool exterior. While his inner turmoil intensified, Paula, eager to believe in their reconciliation, overlooked the subtle signs of Andrew's internal struggle. As weeks turned into months, the charade became second nature to Andrew. He played the role of the forgiving husband with chilling precision, all while his resentment festered and grew. He began to view his performance as a cosmic joke, taking a perverse pleasure in how easily everyone, especially Paula, bought into the illusion. As summer faded into autumn, Andrew Keene's carefully maintained facade began to crack under the weight of his growing obsession. At school, Andrew found himself unable to focus on his lessons, his mind constantly wandering to thoughts of Paula and David together. He snapped at students for minor infractions, his usual patience evaporating like morning dew. Colleagues noticed the change, whispering concerns about his erratic behavior in the teacher's lounge. As his jealousy deepened, Andrew's behavior grew increasingly erratic. He installed a hidden GPS tracker on Paula's car, justifying the invasion of privacy as necessary to ease his fears. Late at night, he would pore over her location data, constructing elaborate scenarios to explain any deviation from her usual routes. Andrew's once diverse interests narrowed to a singular focus, monitoring Paula and by extension David. He created fake social media accounts to follow David online, scrutinizing every post and interaction for any hint of continued contact with Paula. Hours were spent driving past David's apartment and office, hoping to catch a glimpse of something, anything to confirm his suspicions. The turning point came on an October evening. Andrew, having convinced himself that Paula was meeting David after work, followed her to a small art gallery downtown. As he watched from across the street, he saw Paula emerge from the gallery, laughing and chatting with a group of colleagues. There was no sign of David. In that moment, something inside Andrew snapped. The realization that his suspicions were unfounded did nothing to quell the rage and humiliation that had been building for months. Sitting in his car watching Paula drive away, Andrew made a decision. If reality wouldn't conform to his suspicions, he would force it to do so. He would create a situation that would justify his jealousy, his anger, and ultimately, the retribution he now craved. The location was his first major decision. Andrew knew the crime scene needed to be isolated enough to avoid witnesses, but not so remote as to arouse suspicion. After careful consideration, he settled on an abandoned lumber mill on the outskirts of town. The dilapidated building, slated for demolition in the coming year, offered both privacy and multiple access points. Next came the question of method. Andrew wanted something that would be difficult to trace back to him, ruling out firearms or any weapon he would need to purchase. After much deliberation, he decided on a garrote, silent, effective, and easily made from household materials. Piece by piece, Andrew accumulated the necessary supplies. He bought lengths of wire from different hardware stores across the county, paying cash each time. Gloves, bleach, and other cleaning supplies were added to regular shopping trips in small quantities to avoid arousing suspicion. He crafted a fake email account under the guise of a local arts organization. He composed a message to David, inviting him to participate in a secretive art installation project at the mill. The email emphasized the need for discretion, explaining that the project was meant to be a surprise for the community. Andrew knew that David's ego and artistic ambitions would make such an offer irresistible. As he waited for David to take the bait, Andrew fine-tuned the details of his plan. He meticulously cleaned his car, removing any traces of hair or fibers that could later implicate him. He purchased a burner phone with cash from a convenience store 2 towns over, using it to communicate with David under the guise of the arts organization coordinator. The night before the planned meeting, Andrew made a final visit to the lumber mill. He cleared a path through the debris, ensuring he would have a clean line of sight from his hiding spot to the entrance. With gloved hands, he positioned the garrote wire behind a stack of rotting pallets, ready to be grabbed at a moment's notice. As he stood in the musty darkness of the mill, the reality of what he was about to do finally hit Andrew. With grim determination, Andrew left the mill and drove home, knowing that the next time he returned it would be to commit murder. Andrew Keene went through the motions of his morning routine, kissing Paula goodbye with a casualness that belied the turmoil roiling within him. He taught his classes on autopilot, his mind fixated on the events to come. As the final bell rang, Andrew hurried to his car, his heart pounding. He drove to the lumber mill, taking a circuitous route to avoid being seen. Parking a quarter-mile away, he donned a pair of nondescript boots he'd purchased for the occasion and made his way to the mill on foot. Inside the dilapidated structure, Andrew positioned himself behind the stack of pallets, the garrote wire coiled in his gloved hands. The minutes ticked by with agonizing slowness, each sound from outside sending a jolt of adrenaline through his body. At precisely 4:30 p.m., the crunch of tires on gravel announced David's arrival. Andrew held his breath as footsteps approached, echoing in the cavernous space. David's voice called out tentatively, "Hello? Is anyone here?" Andrew remained perfectly still, watching as David moved further into the mill. When David's back was turned, Andrew emerged from his hiding spot, wire at the ready. In 3 quick strides, he was behind David. Before David could fully register the presence behind him, Andrew looped the wire around his throat and pulled tight. David's hands flew up, clawing desperately at the wire cutting into his neck. He thrashed violently, his elbow catching Andrew in the ribs with surprising force. The struggle seemed to last an eternity. Andrew's arms burned with the effort of maintaining his grip as David fought for his life. Gradually, David's movements became weaker, his gasps for air more sporadic. With one final convulsive shudder, David Reeves went limp in Andrew's arms. Andrew held on for several minutes more, ensuring that no life remained in his rival's body. When he finally released his grip, David crumpled to the floor like a marionette with cut strings. Panting heavily, Andrew stared down at the lifeless form before him. The reality of what he had done crashed over him in waves. He had imagined this moment countless times, but nothing had prepared him for the stark finality of taking a human life. Moving as if in a trance, Andrew began the process of cleaning up the scene. He collected stray fibers from David's clothing, pocketing them to dispose of later. Using bleach he had stashed earlier, he meticulously cleaned any surfaces he or David might have touched. As the light outside began to fade, Andrew dragged David's body to a pre-dug hole in the far corner of the mill. He covered the shallow grave with debris, knowing that the impending demolition would further conceal his crime. Before leaving, Andrew took one last look around the mill with a mix of horror and grim satisfaction. Andrew realized that he had done it. He had committed the perfect murder. Driving home, Andrew found Paula already there, preparing dinner. He forced himself to act normally, commenting on the meal and asking about her day with casualness. Over the next few days, Andrew was hyper-aware of every news report and passing police car. He scoured local news websites for any mention of David's disappearance, but found nothing. The lack of immediate alarm was both a relief and a new source of anxiety. Paula, oblivious to the turmoil beneath her husband's calm exterior, commented on how much more relaxed Andrew seemed lately. She attributed it to their efforts at reconciliation, never suspecting the dark truth behind his changed demeanor. A week after the murder, the first signs of concern about David's whereabouts began to surface. His clients reported missed deadlines and unanswered calls. Friends posted on social media, asking if anyone had heard from him. Andrew watched these developments with a mixture of dread and perverse fascination. When the police finally became involved, Andrew was ready. He had prepared a detailed account of his movements on the day of David's disappearance, complete with fabricated receipts and a meticulously edited digital trail. He even mentioned to Paula in earshot of a neighbor that he hoped that nice graphic designer was okay, establishing an alibi of concern. As the investigation gained momentum, Andrew found himself drawn into the search efforts. He volunteered to help distribute flyers and even organized a search party to comb areas of Pinewood Park. His apparent dedication to finding David threw off any suspicion that might have fallen on him. But beneath his helpful exterior, Andrew was constantly on edge.
Every unexpected knock at the door sent his heart racing. He began to have vivid nightmares of David's final moments, waking up drenched in sweat. The weight of his actions pressed down on him, a constant, invisible burden that he knew he would carry for the rest of his life. As days turned into weeks with no sign of David Reeves, the Pinewood Police Department intensified its investigation. Detective Laura Stewart, a recent transfer from Portland with a reputation for solving cold cases, was assigned to lead the inquiry. Stewart's first step was to retrace David's last known movements. Interviews with his clients and friends painted a picture of a man who had been excited about an upcoming art project, though details were frustratingly vague. Stewart's interest was piqued by mentions of a secretive installation at an undisclosed location. The detective's scrutiny soon turned to David's personal life. It didn't take long for rumors of his affair with Paula Keene to surface. Stewart approached the subject delicately in her interview with Paula, who admitted to the past indiscretion but insisted it had ended months ago. Andrew, present for the interview, played the part of the supportive husband perfectly, expressing sympathy for David's disappearance despite the history. As Stewart dug deeper, inconsistencies began to emerge. David's bank records showed no unusual activity, and his passport remained in his apartment. His car was found parked at his residence, ruling out the possibility that he had simply left town. The more Stewart investigated, the more convinced she became that David had met with foul play. A breakthrough came when a hiker reported finding David's phone in Pinewood Park, miles from his usual haunts. Forensic analysis revealed that the phone had been wiped clean of data, an act that struck Stewart as deliberate and suspicious. With each new piece of evidence, the circle of suspects narrowed. Stewart found herself returning again and again to the Keenes. Paula's affair provided a motive, but her genuine distress seemed authentic. Andrew's alibi was solid, yet something about his too perfect responses nagged at Stewart's instincts. As autumn deepened into winter, the case consumed Detective Stewart. She spent long nights poring over evidence, convinced that the key to unraveling the mystery lay somewhere in the complex web of relationships surrounding David Reeves. Little did she know, the truth was far closer and far more chilling than she could have imagined. The turning point in the investigation came on a frigid December morning, 3 months after David Reeves's disappearance. A team of surveyors, assessing the old lumber mill for demolition, made a grisly discovery. Partially unearthed by recent heavy rains, David's decomposing body was found in a shallow grave. Detective Stewart and her team descended on the scene, meticulously combing the area for evidence. Despite Andrew's careful cleanup, trace evidence remained. Fibers matched to David's clothing were found embedded in the floorboards, and DNA analysis of the soil revealed blood spatter consistent with a violent struggle. The discovery of the body shifted the investigation into high gear. Stewart re-interviewed everyone connected to David, this time with a sharper focus. It was during her second conversation with Andrew Keene that things began to unravel. Stewart noticed subtle inconsistencies in Andrew's story, minor details that didn't quite align with his previous statements. His demeanor, once calmly cooperative, now had an undercurrent of nervousness. When Stewart casually mentioned that they had surveillance footage from near the lumber mill, she saw a flicker of panic cross Andrew's face before he quickly composed himself. That momentary lapse was all Stewart needed. She intensified her questioning, probing deeper into Andrew's alibi for the day of David's disappearance. Under the relentless pressure, Andrew's carefully constructed facade began to crumble. In a dramatic turn, Andrew broke down and confessed to the murder. He recounted the entire sordid tale, his discovery of the affair, his months of secret planning, and the final fatal confrontation at the lumber mill. As he spoke, it was as if a dam had burst, years of pent-up emotion pouring out in a torrent of words. Paula, brought in for questioning separately, was shattered by the revelation. She struggled to reconcile the loving, forgiving husband she thought she knew with the man capable of such a calculated act of violence. Her world, already fragile from the strain of the affair and its aftermath, collapsed entirely. As news of Andrew's confession spread, the town of Pinewood reeled in shock. The image of the Keenes as the perfect couple, even in the face of adversity, was shattered. Friends and colleagues struggled to understand how they could have missed the signs of Andrew's deteriorating mental state. In the following weeks, more details emerged. His internet search history revealed months of research on undetectable poisons and body disposal methods. The depth of his obsession and the meticulous nature of his planning chilled even the most seasoned detectives. Andrew Keene was charged with first-degree murder. As he awaited trial, psychologists debated whether his actions were the result of temporary insanity or a more deep-seated pathology. Paula, grappling with her own guilt and the traumatic loss of both her lover and her husband, retreated from public life. The case of David Reeves's murder would long be remembered in Pinewood as a tragic reminder that even in the most seemingly idyllic settings, darkness can lurk just beneath the surface. It served as a cautionary tale about the destructive power of jealousy and the unforeseen consequences of betrayal, forever changing the way the town viewed itself and its inhabitants. On the morning of September 15, 2019, the body of Sydney Watkins, a 35-year-old elementary school teacher, was discovered in her modest two-bedroom home. The scene was gruesome, with clear signs of a struggle and multiple stab wounds marring Sydney's body. As detectives combed through the evidence, a chilling story began to emerge, one of a divorce gone wrong, a custody battle spiraling out of control, and a father driven to the unthinkable. At the center of this tragedy was Zendaya Thornton, the 8-year-old daughter of Sydney Watkins and Mark Thornton. Zendaya, a bright and vivacious child, had become the unwitting prize in a tug-of-war between her parents. What started as a mutual decision to end an unhappy marriage had devolved into a bitter feud, with both parties fighting tooth and nail for primary custody of their only child. Mark Thornton was born on July 12, 1982, in Hartford, Connecticut, the only child of Robert and Linda Thornton. From an early age, Mark showed signs of a driven and competitive nature, excelling in both academics and sports. However, beneath the surface of this seemingly idyllic childhood lay a darker reality. Robert Thornton was a strict disciplinarian with a volatile temper, often subjecting young Mark to harsh punishments for minor infractions. Linda, though loving, was passive in the face of her husband's outbursts, leaving Mark to navigate a household where success was demanded and failure was met with anger. As Mark grew older, he internalized his father's perfectionist tendencies and explosive temper. He developed a persona of confidence and charm, but those close to him noted an underlying insecurity and a need for control. Sydney Watkins came from a starkly different background. Born on March 3, 1984, in New Haven, Connecticut, she was the youngest of 3 children in a close-knit, working-class family. Her father, James, was a carpenter, and her mother, Mary, worked part-time as a librarian. Despite their modest means, the Watkins household was filled with love, laughter, and a strong emphasis on education and community service. Growing up, Sydney was known for her kind heart and empathetic nature. She excelled in school, particularly in subjects related to literature and social studies. Her passion for helping others led her to pursue a degree in education at Southern Connecticut State University. Sydney's gentle demeanor and patience made her a natural with children. She volunteered at local youth centers throughout college and, upon graduation, secured a position as a second-grade teacher at an elementary school. Mark and Sydney's paths crossed in the summer of 2008 at a mutual friend's wedding. Mark, then a rising star at his law firm, was immediately drawn to Sydney's warmth and authenticity, qualities that stood in stark contrast to the cutthroat world he inhabited daily. Sydney, in turn, was charmed by Mark's confidence and ambition, seeing in him a drive that complemented her more laid-back nature. Their courtship was a whirlwind romance. Mark swept Sydney off her feet with grand gestures and lavish dates, while Sydney introduced Mark to the simple joys of home-cooked meals and quiet evenings spent in meaningful conversation. After a year of dating, Mark proposed during a surprise weekend getaway to Sydney's vineyard. Sydney, deeply in love and envisioning a future filled with happiness and stability, joyfully accepted. The couple wed in a lavish ceremony in the spring of 2010, with both sides of the family coming together to celebrate what everyone believed would be a long and happy union. The first few years of Mark and Sydney's marriage were, by all accounts, blissful. They purchased a charming home in Oak Ridge, settling into domestic life with enthusiasm. Mark's career continued to flourish, while Sydney found fulfillment in her teaching and in creating a warm, inviting home for the couple. However, as time passed, small cracks began to appear in their seemingly perfect facade.
Mark's work hours grew longer, and his stress levels increased as he pursued partnership at his firm. Sydney, while supportive, began to feel neglected and lonely. On April 17, 2011, Zendaya Thornton was born, bringing a renewed sense of joy and purpose to Mark and Sydney's lives. Mark, initially apprehensive about fatherhood given his own complicated relationship with his father, found himself utterly devoted to his daughter. He would spend hours reading to her, playing with her, and planning for her future. As Zendaya approached school age, the differences between Mark and Sydney became more pronounced. These differences led to frequent arguments, with each parent believing they knew what was best for their daughter. By the time Zendaya was 6 years old, the strain on Mark and Sydney's marriage had reached a breaking point. The constant arguments, lack of emotional intimacy, and fundamental disagreements about parenting had eroded the love that once bound them together. The divorce proceedings began in January 2018, and what started as an amicable separation quickly turned contentious. Mark, feeling betrayed and fearing the loss of control over his family, hired Gregory Patel, a notoriously aggressive divorce attorney. Sydney, overwhelmed by the sudden hostility, turned to her college friend Rachel Goldstein, a family law attorney known for her compassionate approach. The legal battle that ensued was bitter and protracted. Mark contested every aspect of the divorce, from the division of assets to the custody arrangements. He accused Sydney of being an unfit mother, citing her lack of ambition and permissive parenting style as reasons why he should have primary custody of Zendaya. Sydney, in turn, presented evidence of Mark's controlling behavior and volatile temper, arguing that his parenting style was detrimental to Zendaya's emotional well-being. The proceedings dragged on for months, draining both parties financially and emotionally. After nearly a year of legal wrangling, the court finally issued its ruling in November 2018. Taking into account Zendaya's age, her established routine, and the testimonies of various experts, the judge awarded joint legal custody to both parents. However, Sydney was granted primary physical custody, with Mark receiving generous visitation rights, including every other weekend and one weeknight dinner. This arrangement, while seemingly fair, left Mark feeling defeated and resentful. He viewed the decision as a personal failure and a threat to his relationship with Zendaya. Unbeknownst to Sydney or the court, this custody ruling would set in motion a series of events that would lead to tragedy. In the months following the divorce settlement, Mark's behavior became increasingly erratic and hostile. He began to obsessively document every interaction with Sydney, looking for any perceived misstep or violation of the custody agreement. His communications with her, once civil if tense, devolved into a barrage of accusatory emails and text messages. Mark's visitations with Zendaya became a source of constant conflict. He would return her late, change plans at the last minute, or attempt to schedule extra time without consulting Sydney. During handovers, he would often make snide remarks about Sydney's parenting, or try to manipulate Zendaya into saying she wanted to spend more time with him. At work, Mark's performance began to suffer as he focused more and more on finding ways to regain control over his family situation. Colleagues noticed his shortened temper and distracted demeanor, with some expressing concern about his mental state. Mark's boss, noticing the decline in his work quality, suggested he take some time off to sort out his personal issues. This only served to fuel Mark's paranoia, convincing him that everyone was conspiring against him. Sydney, deeply concerned about the impact of Mark's behavior on Zendaya, did her best to shield their daughter from the growing tension. She maintained a calm demeanor during handovers, redirected Zendaya's attention when Mark made inappropriate comments, and tried to ensure that Zendaya's time with her father remained positive. Privately, Sydney sought advice from her attorney and Zendaya's pediatrician on how to handle the situation. She began keeping a detailed log of Mark's behavior, documenting late returns, inappropriate comments, and any signs of emotional distress in Zendaya following visits with her father. Sydney also enrolled Zendaya in play therapy sessions with child psychologist Dr. Lisa Martinez, hoping to provide Zendaya with a safe space to process her feelings about the divorce and her father's changing behavior. Despite her efforts to keep things amicable for Zendaya's sake, Sydney found herself increasingly fearful of Mark's unpredictable moods. She installed a security system in their home and informed Zendaya's school about the situation, requesting that they not release Zendaya to Mark outside of his designated pickup times. Sydney also reached out to her brother Michael,
asking him to be present during handovers when possible, hoping that a witness might temper Mark's hostility. As the conflict between her parents escalated, Zendaya's sunny disposition began to dim. Once outgoing and confident, she became withdrawn at school, often sitting alone at lunch or refusing to participate in group activities. Her teacher noticed a decline in Zendaya's academic performance and an increase in anxiety-related behaviors, such as nail-biting and hair-twirling. At home with Sydney, Zendaya became clingy and prone to emotional outbursts. She would often wake up with nightmares, calling out for both her parents. Sydney would find her daughter in tears, confused and upset by the conflicting loyalties she felt. Zendaya's play therapy sessions revealed a child torn between love for both parents and a deep-seated fear of abandonment. In early August 2019, Mark filed a motion for modification of the custody agreement, seeking primary physical custody of Zendaya. His petition cited Sydney's alleged parental alienation and claimed that Zendaya was flourishing under his care while regressing when with her mother. Sydney, armed with documentation of Mark's erratic behavior and reports from Zendaya's therapist, filed a counter-motion requesting supervised visitation for Mark. The court scheduled a hearing for September 20th, giving both parties just over a month to prepare their cases. This impending legal showdown ratcheted up the tension between Mark and Sydney to unprecedented levels. Mark became obsessed with winning the case, viewing it as his last chance to assert control over his family. Sydney, meanwhile, grew increasingly anxious about the possibility of losing custody of Zendaya, fearing for her daughter's emotional well-being if placed primarily in Mark's care. As the hearing date approached, Mark's grip on reality began to slip. He stopped showing up to work, using all his time to build his case against Sydney. His apartment became a chaotic mess of legal documents, photos of Zendaya, and scribbled notes detailing perceived slights and conspiracy theories. Mark's few remaining friends tried to reach out, concerned by his disheveled appearance and rambling phone calls, but he pushed them away, accusing them of siding with Sydney. Mark's paranoia reached new heights. He became convinced that Sydney was poisoning Zendaya against him and that the entire legal system was corrupt. He started following Sydney and Zendaya, taking photos of their activities and interpreting innocent interactions as evidence of Sydney's unfitness as a mother. In his distorted thinking, Mark began to see himself as Zendaya's savior, the only one who could protect her from Sydney's harmful influence. During this time, Mark's interactions with Zendaya became increasingly disturbing. He would interrogate her about Sydney's activities, make disparaging comments about her mother, and fill her head with promises of a better life once he won custody. Zendaya, confused and frightened by her father's intensity, began to resist visits, clinging to Sydney and begging not to go with Mark. 3 days before the scheduled custody hearing, Mark reached his breaking point. After a particularly difficult handover where Zendaya cried and refused to go with him, Mark became convinced that Sydney had turned his daughter against him completely. In his delusional state, he concluded that the upcoming hearing was rigged, that he would never receive a fair judgment, and that Sydney would always find a way to keep Zendaya from him. It was at this moment, alone in his cluttered apartment surrounded by the detritus of his obsession, that Mark made the fateful decision to take matters into his own hands. In his twisted logic, he reasoned that the only way to ensure he would have custody of Zendaya was to eliminate Sydney from the equation entirely. With cold determination, Mark began to plan the unthinkable, the murder of his ex-wife. In the early hours of September 15, 2019, Mark set his plan into motion. He had spent the previous 2 days meticulously preparing, his legal mind perversely applied to the task of committing and concealing a murder. He chose a Sunday, knowing Sydney would be home alone while Zendaya was at a sleepover with her maternal grandparents. Mark packed a bag containing a hunting knife he had purchased with cash at a sporting goods store 2 towns over. He also included rope, duct tape, and cleaning supplies, having researched methods to eliminate evidence. To establish an alibi, Mark had set up his home computer to make online purchases and send emails throughout the night and morning. He had also left his cell phone at home, connected to the Wi-Fi to create a digital footprint, suggesting he never left his apartment. At 4:30 a.m., Mark left his apartment, careful to avoid security cameras and potential witnesses. He drove a rental car, paid for with a prepaid credit card, to a spot a few blocks from Sydney's house. From there, he proceeded on foot, his heart racing with a mix of fear and determination. Mark arrived at Sydney's house just before dawn. Using a copy of the house key he had secretly made during a previous visit, he silently entered. The house was quiet, with only the soft hum of the refrigerator breaking the silence. Mark crept up the stairs, the knife clutched tightly in his hand. He paused outside Sydney's bedroom. He pushed open the door to find Sydney still asleep. The sound roused her and she sat up, confusion quickly turning to terror as she recognized Mark's figure in the dim light. "Sydney, what are you doing to my daughter?" Mark's voice was low and menacing. Sydney scrambled out of bed, her voice shaking as she tried to reason with him. But Mark was beyond reason. He lunged forward, grabbing Sydney's arm as she attempted to run past him. She fought back fiercely. They struggled, crashing into furniture and knocking items off shelves. Sydney managed to break free momentarily. Running towards the hallway, Mark pursued her, his face contorted with rage. In the hallway, he caught up to her, tackling her to the ground. Sydney continued to fight, scratching and kicking, leaving defensive wounds that would later become crucial evidence. In a frenzy of violence, Mark brought the knife down repeatedly. Sydney's screams were cut short as the blade found its mark, again and again. The hallway walls, once adorned with happy family photos, were now splattered with blood. As quickly as it had begun, it was over. Mark stood over Sydney's lifeless body, his rage giving way to shock as the reality of what he had done began to sink in. The knife slipped from his blood-soaked hands, clattering to the floor. He rushed to retrieve his bag of supplies, frantically trying to clean up the worst of the blood. In his haste and shock, Mark made critical mistakes. He missed several blood spatters, left partial fingerprints, and failed to notice that in the struggle, Sydney had managed to grab of his hair. As the first light of dawn began to filter through the windows, Mark gathered his things and fled the scene, leaving behind a trail of evidence that would ultimately lead to his downfall. At 8:30 a.m., Karen Mitchell, Sydney's close friend and fellow teacher, arrived at the house. They had plans to carpool to a teachers' conference that morning. When Sydney didn't answer the door, Karen used the spare key she knew was hidden under a flower pot. The moment Karen stepped inside, she knew something was terribly wrong. The house was eerily quiet, and there was a faint coppery smell in the air. She called out. As she climbed the stairs, she noticed smears on the wall that made her heart race. Karen's scream pierced the quiet Sunday morning when she discovered Sydney's body in the upstairs hallway. Trembling, she fumbled for her phone and dialed 911. "I think my friend has been murdered," she sobbed to the operator. "Oh God, there's so much blood." Within minutes, the peaceful suburban street was transformed into a chaotic crime scene. Police cars and ambulances crowded the driveway, their lights flashing silently in the morning sun. Neighbors gathered on their lawns, watching in shock as police tape went up around Sydney's home. The nightmare had only just begun. Detective Lisa Hawkins of the police department took charge of the investigation. With 15 years of experience in homicide cases, she immediately recognized the signs of a crime of passion. The brutality of the attack, the lack of forced entry, and the personal nature of the crime all pointed to someone close to the victim. As the forensics team combed through the house, collecting blood samples, fingerprints, and other trace evidence, Detective Hawkins began interviewing neighbors and friends. Karen Mitchell's statement about Sydney's contentious relationship with her ex-husband quickly made Mark Thornton the primary suspect. The investigation moved rapidly. A search warrant was obtained for Mark's apartment, where detectives found a disturbing shrine to Zendaya and Sydney, walls covered with photos and legal documents. Mark's computer revealed his obsessive research into custody laws and, more damning, methods of committing untraceable murder. Meanwhile, the forensics team made crucial discoveries at the crime scene. Despite Mark's attempts to clean up, they found his DNA under Sydney's fingernails and matched the hair Sydney had grabbed to Mark's genetic profile. Partial fingerprints found in the house were also consistent with Mark's. As the evidence mounted, Detective Hawkins knew they needed to move quickly. Mark Thornton had become not just a suspect, but a potentially dangerous fugitive who might attempt to reach his daughter. Unaware that he was already the prime suspect, Mark attempted to establish his alibi. He returned to his apartment, showered, and meticulously cleaned his clothes and shoes. He then made several calls, including one to Sydney's phone, leaving a message asking about picking up Zendaya later that day. Mark then went to a local coffee shop, making sure to be seen by the staff and engaging in conversation with other patrons. He even called the police himself later that afternoon, expressing concern that he couldn't reach Sydney. However,
Mark's careful planning began to unravel almost immediately. A neighbor had noticed the unfamiliar rental car parked near Sydney's house in the early morning hours. The car rental company confirmed that Mark had rented the vehicle using a prepaid card, a detail he had overlooked in his haste to remove the car from the scene. The trial of Mark Thornton began 6 months after Sydney's murder. The prosecution presented a compelling case built on both forensic evidence and a disturbing psychological profile of the defendant. Forensic experts testified about the DNA evidence found at the crime scene, including the hairs matched to Mark and the blood spatter patterns consistent with the prosecution's account of the murder. The rental car evidence was also presented, along with security camera footage, showing a figure matching Mark's description near Sydney's house on the morning of the crime. Detective Hawkins took the stand, detailing the investigation and the mounting evidence that led to Mark's arrest. She presented Mark's computer searches in the shrine found in his apartment, painting a picture of a man obsessed and spiraling out of control. A parade of witnesses took the stand, each adding to the portrait of a tragedy years in the making. Zendaya's teachers testified about the child's increasing anxiety and behavioral issues, which they attributed to the high-conflict divorce. Sydney's friends and colleagues spoke of her fear of Mark and her efforts to protect Zendaya from the escalating tension. Mark's defense team attempted to paint a picture of a loving father, driven to desperation by a biased court system and a vindictive ex-wife. They suggested that Sydney had been the one alienating Zendaya from her father, causing Mark's mental state to deteriorate. The defense also tried to cast doubt on the forensic evidence, suggesting that the crime scene had been contaminated and that the DNA evidence was inconclusive. They presented character witnesses who spoke of Mark's previous reputation as a dedicated father and successful lawyer. However, their efforts were largely overshadowed by the mountain of evidence against Mark and his own erratic behavior during the trial. After a 3-week trial and 2 days of deliberation, the jury returned with a unanimous verdict: guilty of first-degree murder. The courtroom was silent as the verdict was read, broken only by a muffled sob from Mark's mother. Mark, given the opportunity to speak, showed little remorse. In a rambling statement, he continued to blame Sydney and the court system for his actions, claiming he had only wanted to protect his daughter. The judge delivered a scathing rebuke before announcing the sentence. "Mr. Thornton, your actions have not only taken a life but have irrevocably damaged your daughter, the very person you claimed to be protecting. You have displayed a shocking lack of empathy and an inability to put your child's needs before your own desires." She then sentenced Mark Thornton to life in prison, without the possibility of parole. In the years following the trial, Zendaya Thornton remained in the care of her maternal grandparents. With ongoing therapy and support, she slowly began to heal from the trauma of losing both parents in such a tragic manner. The case led to reforms in the family court system, with increased resources allocated for mental health evaluations and support services for high-conflict divorces. Sydney Watkins' memory lived on through a foundation established in her name, dedicated to supporting children affected by domestic violence. As for Mark Thornton, he spends his days in a maximum security prison, his attempts at appeal repeatedly denied, forever marked as the man who destroyed his family in a misguided attempt to keep it together. On a crisp autumn morning in 2019, the body of Samantha Davenport was discovered in the basement of her modest suburban home, the victim of a brutal and ritualistic murder. At the center of this horrifying tale was Josh Davenport, a 48-year-old insurance adjuster whose unremarkable life belied the shocking acts he would eventually commit. To his neighbors, Josh was a quiet, somewhat awkward man who kept to himself. Few could have imagined the turmoil brewing beneath his placid exterior, or the sinister forces that would ultimately drive him to murder. Josh Davenport's journey to becoming a murderer began long before he ever logged onto the dark web. Born in 1971 to working-class parents, Josh was a shy and introverted child who struggled to form meaningful connections with his peers. His father, a stern factory worker, showed little affection and often berated Josh for his lack of athletic prowess and social skills. His mother, though loving, was overwhelmed by her own struggles with depression and was unable to provide the emotional support Josh desperately needed. Throughout his school years,
Josh found solace in books and computers, excelling academically but failing to develop the social skills necessary to navigate the complexities of human relationships. He graduated high school with honors, but opted to attend the local community college, rather than venturing away from the familiar confines of his town. It was during his college years that Josh experienced his first taste of romantic connection. Samantha, a kind-hearted nursing student, saw past Josh's awkward exterior and was drawn to his intelligence and quiet sensitivity. Their relationship blossomed, and for a time Josh believed he had found the acceptance and love he had always craved. After graduation, Josh secured a job as an insurance adjuster at a local firm, while Samantha began her career as a registered nurse at a general hospital. They married in 1996, settling into a modest home not far from where Josh had grown up. For the first few years, their life together seemed idyllic, but cracks soon began to appear in their relationship. Josh's innate insecurity and fear of abandonment manifested as jealousy and possessiveness. He grew increasingly paranoid about Samantha's interactions with male colleagues and patients, often accusing her of infidelity without cause. Samantha, in turn, became frustrated with Josh's lack of emotional maturity and his inability to trust her. Their arguments grew more frequent and intense, driving a wedge between them that widened with each passing year. As he approached middle age, Josh found himself grappling with a profound sense of disappointment and failure. His career had stagnated, with younger colleagues passing him by for promotions. The dream of starting a family had long since faded, as fertility issues and the strain on their marriage made parenthood an increasingly distant possibility. By his mid-40s, Josh had become a shell of his former self. He went through the motions at work, returning home each evening to a house filled with tension and unspoken resentment. Samantha had grown distant, throwing herself into her career and volunteer work, leaving Josh to confront his loneliness and sense of inadequacy and solitude. It was in this state of desperation and vulnerability that Josh first turned to the internet as a means of escape. What began as harmless browsing of forums and chat rooms gradually led him to explore darker corners of the web, searching for anything to fill the void that had consumed his life. Little did he know that this digital journey would lead him to the doorstep of a group that would exploit his weaknesses and set him on a path to unimaginable darkness. Josh's descent into the world of the dark web began innocuously enough. Late one night, unable to sleep and desperate for some form of human connection, he found himself browsing online forums dedicated to topics ranging from conspiracy theories to the occult. These digital spaces offered Josh a sense of anonymity and acceptance he had never experienced in his day-to-day life. As he delved deeper into these online communities, Josh encountered mentions of the dark web, a hidden part of the internet accessible only through specialized software. Initially, Josh's forays into the dark web were driven by curiosity rather than malice. He marveled at the vast array of information and services available, both legal and illegal. Josh's exploration of the dark web coincided with a particularly difficult period in his marriage. Samantha had recently received a promotion at work, which only served to highlight Josh's own career stagnation. Their arguments had become more frequent and bitter, often ending with Samantha sleeping in the spare bedroom. The dark web became Josh's refuge, a place where he could escape the failures and disappointments of his real life. It was during one of his late-night browsing sessions that Josh stumbled upon a forum. The site's black background and crimson text created an aura of mystery and danger that immediately captivated Josh. As he read through the posts, he found discussions of ancient rituals, dark powers, and the promise of transformation for those deemed worthy. Something about the forum's blend of occult knowledge and promises of personal empowerment resonated deeply with Josh. Here was a group that seemed to offer the sense of purpose and belonging he had craved his entire life. Despite a faint voice of caution in the back of his mind, Josh created an account and made his first post, introducing himself as a seeker of hidden truths. The response was almost immediate. Within minutes, Josh received welcoming messages from other members, each more effusive than the last. As he basked in this sudden attention and acceptance, Josh failed to recognize the predatory nature of the interest being shown in him. He had taken his first step into a world that would ultimately consume him, setting in motion a chain of events that would end in tragedy and horror. The forum was far more than just another dark web cult. It was a carefully constructed digital ecosystem designed to identify, manipulate, and exploit vulnerable individuals like Josh Davenport. At its core, the group presented itself as a modern mystery cult, blending elements of ancient paganism, satanic imagery, and New Age spirituality into a seductive tapestry of esoteric knowledge and promised power. The forum's structure was deceptively simple at first glance. New members like Josh started in the outer circle, known as the Seekers. Here they were encouraged to share their personal struggles and desires, all under the guise of seeking spiritual guidance. More experienced members, called guides, would respond with carefully crafted messages of support and understanding, gradually introducing the group's core beliefs and practices. As seekers proved their dedication through active participation and completion of assigned spiritual exercises, they could progress to the rank of initiate. This inner circle had access to more specialized sub-forums and one-on-one mentoring sessions with higher-ranking members. It was at this level that the true nature of the cult began to reveal itself, with discussions of blood rituals, sacrificial magic, and the accumulation of dark energies. At the pinnacle of the dark forum stood the enigmatic figure known only as the Crimson Prophet. This individual, whose true identity remained a closely guarded secret, was revered by cult members as a direct conduit to ancient and powerful dark forces. The Crimson Prophet's posts were rare but always impactful, written in a cryptic style that invited multiple interpretations and sparked fierce debates among the followers. Key members of the cult played specific roles in the indoctrination and manipulation of newcomers like Josh. There was Midnight Whisper, a self-proclaimed empath who excelled at identifying and exploiting emotional vulnerabilities. Darksage served as the group's lore master, weaving together mythologies and occult traditions to create a compelling narrative of secret knowledge. Shadowwalker acted as the cult's enforcer, subtly threatening those who showed signs of doubt or resistance. The beliefs propagated by the cult of the forum were a toxic blend of fatalism, elitism, and promised salvation through darkness. Members were taught that the world was inherently corrupt and that true power could only be achieved by embracing humanity's darkest impulses. The cult preached that certain individuals, their followers, were chosen by dark forces to bring about a new age of chaos and transformation. Rituals played a central role in the cult's practices. These began as seemingly harmless meditation exercises and symbolic gestures performed in front of webcams. However, as members progressed through the ranks, the rituals became increasingly extreme, often involving self-harm, sexual degradation, and eventually, acts of violence against others. Financial exploitation was another key aspect of the cult's operations. Members were encouraged to make offerings to prove their dedication, with higher ranks requiring ever larger financial commitments. As Josh Davenport delved deeper into the cult, he remained unaware of the full scope of the organization he had joined. Josh's progression from seeker to initiate was rapid, fueled by his desperate need for acceptance and his willingness to embrace the cult's teachings. He eagerly completed each assigned task, from meditation exercises focused on channeling dark energies to more disturbing activities like recording himself reciting blasphemous oaths in front of a makeshift altar. As Josh delved deeper into the cult's ideology, his behavior in the real world began to change noticeably. He grew more withdrawn at work, his performance slipping to the point where he received a formal warning from his supervisor. At home, the distance between him and Samantha widened into an unbridgeable chasm. When she attempted to discuss her concerns about his changed demeanor, Josh reacted with uncharacteristic anger, accusing her of trying to hold him back from his true potential. The rituals Josh performed grew increasingly extreme. What began as simple candle-lighting ceremonies evolved into bloodletting rituals, with Josh using a ceremonial dagger, provided by the cult, to make small cuts on his arms and chest. He meticulously documented these acts, sharing the images with his online mentors who praised his dedication and promised that greater power awaited him. Josh's physical appearance began to deteriorate as he neglected his health in favor of spending more time online. He lost weight. His skin took on a pallid hue and dark circles formed under his eyes from countless nights spent hunched over his computer screen. Samantha's pleas for him to seek help fell on deaf ears, as Josh convinced himself that she simply couldn't understand the profound transformation he was undergoing. As Josh progressed through the ranks of the cult, he was granted access to more exclusive areas of the forum. Here, he encountered discussions of even darker practices, including animal sacrifice and the harnessing of sexual energy for magical purposes. The turning point came when Josh was selected for a one-on-one digital audience with the Crimson Prophet. This rare honor filled Josh with a sense of pride and purpose he hadn't felt in years. As he sat before his computer, heart racing in anticipation, Josh felt that he was on the verge of unlocking the secrets of the universe. He had no way of knowing that this conversation would set in motion a series of events that would lead to tragedy and the destruction of everything he had ever known. The digital audience with the Crimson Prophet marked a critical juncture in Josh's descent into darkness. The encounter was carefully orchestrated to maximize its psychological impact, with Josh instructed to prepare his sacred space, don ceremonial robes, and engage in a preparatory ritual involving meditation and self-flagellation. "The prophet, you have been chosen," the message began. "You stand at the threshold of true power, but the path forward requires the ultimate sacrifice. Are you prepared to shed the last vestiges of your former self and embrace the darkness that will set you free?" Josh's fingers trembled as he typed his response. "I am ready, great prophet. Tell me what I must do." What followed was a masterclass in manipulation. The Crimson Prophet began by reinforcing Josh's sense of specialness and destiny. They wove a narrative that recast Josh's life struggles as tests of worthiness, positioning him as a long-awaited messiah figure within the cult's mythology. The prophet then began to probe Josh's psyche, asking pointed questions about his relationships, particularly with Samantha. Josh, his inhibitions lowered by the intoxicating atmosphere of the encounter, poured out his frustrations and resentments. He spoke of feeling emasculated by Samantha's success, of the gnawing fear that she would leave him for someone better. With each confession, the prophet offered validation and twisted guidance. "Your wife is an anchor, holding you back from your true potential," the prophet declared. "She is a servant of the light, unconsciously working to suppress your growing power. As long as she lives, you can never fully embrace your destiny." The suggestion of violence was introduced gradually, cloaked in the language of ritual and sacrifice. The prophet spoke of ancient rites that required the offering of that which the aspirant held most dear. In Josh's case, the prophet asserted, this could only mean one thing: Samantha's life. By the end of the session, Josh's mind was reeling. The prophet left him with a set of detailed instructions for a ritual that would supposedly unleash his latent powers, a ritual that would culminate in Samantha's death. "Perform this rite, and you will be reborn as a living god," the prophet promised. "Fail and you will be cast out, forever unworthy of the gifts that could have been yours." As the prophet's avatar faded from the screen, Josh sat in stunned silence, the full weight of what he was considering crashing down upon him. A small part of him recognized the madness of what he was contemplating, but that voice was quickly drowned out by the chorus of his own insecurities and the seductive whispers of promised power. The week leading up to the fateful night was a blur of feverish preparation and mounting tension for Josh. By day, he went through the motions of his normal life, his colleagues and even Samantha unaware of the storm raging within him. By night, he meticulously gathered the components for the ritual as specified by the Crimson Prophet: black candles, a silver chalice, a ceremonial dagger with a bone handle, and various herbs and powders of dubious origin. As the designated date approached, Josh's mental state deteriorated rapidly. He barely slept, spending hours poring over the instructions he'd been given, memorizing the incantations and visualizing the act he was about to commit. Samantha, sensing the growing tension, made several attempts to reach out to Josh. She suggested counseling, tried to engage him in conversations about their future, and even planned a weekend getaway in a last-ditch effort to rekindle their connection. Josh rebuffed each overture, his mind already set on the grim task ahead. On the evening of October 15, 2019, Samantha Davenport returned home from her shift at the hospital, exhausted but looking forward to a quiet night with her husband. The house was dark as she entered, save for a faint flickering light emanating from the basement door. Samantha called out Josh's name, receiving no response. Concerned, she made her way down the basement stairs, unaware that she was walking into a nightmare. The scene that greeted Samantha was like something out of a horror film. The basement had been transformed into a macabre ritual space. Black candles formed a large circle in the center of the room, their flames casting writhing shadows on the walls. Strange symbols had been painted on the floor and walls, in what looked disturbingly like blood. In the center of the circle stood Josh, clad in a black robe, his eyes wild and unfocused.
Samantha, what are you doing here? Josh's voice was barely recognizable, a hoarse whisper that sent chills down Samantha's spine. You weren't supposed to be home yet. It's not time. Samantha, frozen in shock and fear, struggled to comprehend the scene before her. Josh, what is all this? What's going on? Her mind raced, trying to reconcile the man before her with the husband she thought she knew. Josh's demeanor shifted, a cruel smile playing across his lips. You're early, my dear, but perhaps this is meant to be. The Dark Lords work in mysterious ways. He gestured for Samantha to enter the circle. Come, join me, be part of my ascension. As Samantha took a hesitant step backward, Josh lunged forward with surprising speed. He grabbed her arm, his grip like iron, and dragged her into the circle. Samantha's screams were cut short as Josh clamped a hand over her mouth, forcing her to the ground. What followed was a scene of unimaginable horror. Josh, lost in the throes of his delusion, began to recite the incantations he had so carefully memorized. His voice rose and fell in an unnatural cadence as he called upon dark forces that existed only in the twisted mythology of the cult. Samantha fought desperately, but Josh's madness lent him an inhuman strength. He bound her wrists and ankles with cord, heedless of her muffled pleas and tears. As he reached for the ceremonial dagger, a fleeting look of doubt crossed his face. For a moment, the man Samantha had married seemed to resurface, horror dawning in his eyes as he realized what he was about to do. But the moment passed. Josh's features hardened once more as he raised the dagger high. This is my sacrifice, he intoned. With this offering, I claim my power and break the chains of my old life. The dagger plunged down, and Samantha's body jerked as the blade pierced her chest. Josh, lost in a frenzy of bloodlust and religious ecstasy, stabbed again and again. As Samantha's life ebbed away, Josh continued the ritual. He collected her blood in the silver chalice, anointed his forehead with it, and chanted the final words of the ceremony. He waited, breathless for the rush of power the Crimson Prophet had promised. Seconds ticked by, then minutes, but nothing changed. The basement remained silent, save for Josh's ragged breathing and the soft hiss of guttering candles. Slowly, terribly, reality began to assert itself. The magnitude of what he had done crashed over Josh like a tidal wave. He looked down at his blood-soaked hands, at the lifeless body of the woman he had once vowed to love and protect, and a wail of anguish tore from his throat. There was no power, no transcendence, only the stark horror of his actions. Josh collapsed beside Samantha's body, cradling her cooling form as sobs racked his body. He remained there through the night, muttering incoherent apologies and pleas for forgiveness to unhearing ears. The discovery of Samantha Davenport's body sent shockwaves through the quiet community. It was the Davenports' next-door neighbor, Mrs. Eleanor Winters, who first raised the alarm. Concerned by the absence of any activity from the house and unable to reach either Josh or Samantha by phone, she called the police to perform a wellness check. Officer Mark Ramirez, a seasoned member of the town's police department, arrived at the Davenport residence at approximately 10:30 a.m. on October 15th. His knock went unanswered, but he noticed a faint, unpleasant odor emanating from the house. Following protocol, Officer Ramirez circled the property, finding the back door unlocked. The smell intensified as he entered, leading him to the partially open basement door. What Officer Ramirez discovered in the basement would haunt him for years to come. Samantha's body lay in the center of a crude occult circle, surrounded by burned-out candles and bizarre symbols. Josh sat nearby, catatonic and covered in dried blood, still clutching his wife's lifeless hand. The crime scene investigators who arrived shortly after were confronted with a gruesome tableau that seemed more fitting for a horror movie than a suburban home. Forensic analyst Dr. Lydia Chen later remarked that in her 15 years on the job, she had never seen a crime scene so ritualistic in nature. The investigation, led by Detective Sandra Morris, quickly focused on unraveling the mystery of Josh's apparent descent into madness. A search of the Davenport home revealed a laptop in Josh's study, which proved to be a crucial piece of evidence. Cyber forensics expert Alan Tsung was brought in to analyze its contents. What Tsung discovered was disturbing. Months of forum posts and private messages documenting Josh's involvement with the cult. The sheer volume of data was staggering, painting a clear picture of Josh's gradual indoctrination and the cult's deliberate manipulation of his vulnerabilities. As investigators dug deeper, they began to uncover other cases across the country with similarities to the Davenport murder. A pattern emerged of lonely middle-aged individuals being drawn into the cult and subsequently committing violent acts. Meanwhile, Josh Davenport remained in a near catatonic state, unresponsive to questioning and seemingly unaware of his surroundings. He was placed under psychiatric hold at the local mental health facility, where Dr. Elena Rodriguez took charge of his care. Initial evaluations suggested a complete mental breakdown, with Josh alternating between periods of unresponsiveness and bouts of hysterical rambling about dark lords and promised power. As the investigation progressed, the community struggled to come to terms with the tragedy. A candlelight vigil was held for Samantha, attended by tens of local residents. The breakthrough in the Davenport case came 3 months after the murder, following tireless efforts by a joint task force of local law enforcement and FBI agents. The key to unraveling the mystery lay in a series of encrypted messages recovered from Josh's laptop, which cyber forensics expert Alan Sung finally managed to decode. These messages revealed the true extent of the cult's operations and the sophisticated methods they used to manipulate vulnerable individuals. The cult's leadership structure was exposed, with the identity of the Crimson Prophet traced to a former psychology professor. Armed with this information, investigators coordinated simultaneous raids targeting key members of the cult. Crimson Prophet was apprehended at a remote compound, where she had been living under an assumed identity. Josh Davenport finally emerged from his catatonic state. In a series of emotionally charged sessions with Dr. Rodriguez, he began to recount the events leading up to Samantha's murder. Josh's confession, filled with remorse and horror at his own actions, provided crucial details that helped prosecutors build their case against the cult leaders. Expert witnesses testified about the psychological tactics employed by the cult, while former members provided chilling accounts of their experiences. Josh Davenport, deemed mentally unfit to stand trial, was committed to a high-security psychiatric facility. His case became a focal point for discussions about criminal responsibility and the nature of culpability in cases of extreme manipulation. In the aftermath of the trial, lawmakers pushed for new legislation to combat online radicalization and protect vulnerable individuals from predatory groups. For the community, the resolution of the case brought a measure of closure, but the scars left by the tragedy ran deep. The Davenport house, once a crime scene and now a painful reminder, was eventually demolished. In its place, the community erected a small memorial garden dedicated to Samantha and other victims of the cult. Born Celeste DuPont in a small Louisiana town, the woman who would become Madame Celeste had a childhood steeped in poverty and superstition. Her mother, Yvette, was a practitioner of voodoo, while her father, Jean-Paul, was a charming con artist who drifted in and out of their lives. From an early age, Celeste learned the art of reading people, picking up on subtle cues and body language that would later serve her well in her chosen profession. As a child, Celeste was often left to her own devices, spending hours exploring the bayou and listening to the stories of local elders. She was particularly drawn to tales of the supernatural, soaking up every bit of folklore and mysticism she could find. It was during this time that she first claimed to have visions, describing vivid dreams that seemed to predict future events. As she entered her teenage years, Celeste's natural beauty and newfound abilities made her the talk of the town. She began to hold seances for her classmates, charging small fees for her services. It was during one of these sessions that she met Thomas, a charismatic drifter who recognized her talent for deception. Together, they embarked on a series of small-time cons across the South, posing as faith healers and fortune-tellers. Their partnership, both romantic and professional, lasted for several years until a scam went wrong. Thomas was arrested, but Celeste managed to evade the authorities. It was then that she decided to reinvent herself, dyeing her hair and adopting the persona of Madame Celeste, the mysterious psychic from Europe. With her new identity, Celeste moved from town to town, honing her craft and building a reputation. She learned to cold read, to manipulate emotions, and to exploit the grief and desperation of her clients. Her cons grew more elaborate, and her fees more exorbitant. It was in Aviara Cove that Madame Celeste set up her most ambitious operation yet. Little did she know that her pursuit of true supernatural power
would lead her down a path of no return, culminating in a crime that would shake the foundations of her carefully constructed world. Robert and Elizabeth Morin were the epitome of old money and social grace. Their sprawling estate on the outskirts of Aviara Cove was a testament to generations of wealth accumulated through shrewd investments and inherited fortune. Robert, in his early 60s, had made a name for himself in the world of finance, while Elizabeth was known for her philanthropic efforts and impeccable taste. The Morins had moved to Aviara Cove 5 years ago, seeking a quieter life away from the bustle of New York City. They quickly became pillars of the community, hosting lavish charity galas and contributing generously to local causes. Their fairy tale romance and seemingly perfect life were the envy of many in town. However, beneath the polished exterior lay a web of secrets and unfulfilled desires. Robert, despite his business acumen, harbored a deep-seated fear of losing everything he had worked for. This paranoia led him to make increasingly risky investments, seeking to multiply his wealth to ensure his legacy. Elizabeth, on the other hand, struggled with the loss of her twin sister in a car accident years ago, an event that left her with a profound sense of guilt and a desperate need for closure. It was Elizabeth who first heard of Madame Celeste through the town's gossip mill. Initially skeptical, she found herself drawn to the idea of communicating with her lost sister. Robert, ever the pragmatist, dismissed the notion of psychics and mediums as nonsense, but as he watched his wife sink deeper into melancholy, he reluctantly agreed to accompany her to a session with the renowned psychic. The Morins' decision to seek out Madame Celeste would prove to be fateful. Their wealth, combined with their emotional vulnerabilities, made them the perfect marks for the cunning psychic. As they made there for their first appointment, neither Robert nor Elizabeth could have imagined the dark turn their lives were about to take. They were about to step into a world where their deepest fears and most fervent hopes would be used against them, setting in motion a chain of events that would end in bloodshed and horror. The first meeting between Madame Celeste and the Morins took place on a crisp autumn evening. As the couple entered the dimly lit parlor, they were immediately enveloped by the heady scent of incense and the soft glow of candles. Madame Celeste, resplendent in a deep purple gown adorned with silver stars, greeted them with a knowing smile that seemed to pierce their very souls. Elizabeth, her eyes wide with a mix of hope and trepidation, spoke first. "Madame Celeste, I've heard so much about you and we hope you can help us." The psychic's gaze lingered on Elizabeth, noting the slight tremor in her voice and the way she clutched her husband's arm. Without missing a beat, Madame Celeste responded, "The spirits have been expecting you, my dear. I sense a great loss in your past, a piece of yourself torn away." Elizabeth gasped, her grip on Robert tightening. Robert, meanwhile, remained stoic, his skepticism evident in the tight set of his jaw. Madame Celeste turned her attention to him, her voice taking on a more authoritative tone. "And you, sir, carry the weight of many responsibilities. The future weighs heavily on your mind." Over the next hour, Madame Celeste wove a tapestry of half-truths and educated guesses, expertly reading the couple's reactions and tailoring her revelations to their responses. She spoke of Elizabeth's sister, describing her with just enough accuracy to be convincing, and hinted at messages from beyond the veil. For Robert, she alluded to business opportunities and potential pitfalls, her vague prophecies playing into his financial anxieties. By the end of the session, Elizabeth was in tears, feeling a connection to her lost sister that she hadn't experienced in years. Even Robert, despite his initial skepticism, found himself unsettled by the accuracy of some of Madame Celeste's insights. As they left, both agreed to return for further consultations. Over the next few weeks, the Morins became regular visitors. Madame Celeste carefully cultivated their trust, each session revealing just enough to keep them coming back for more. She began to suggest more elaborate rituals and expensive offerings to enhance their connection to the spirit world. For Elizabeth, these sessions became a lifeline, a way to assuage her guilt and find peace. Robert, while still harboring doubts, couldn't deny the positive change in his wife's demeanor. Slowly but surely, Madame Celeste was weaving her web around the wealthy couple, drawing them deeper into her world of shadows and secrets. Little did the Morins know that with each visit, they were inching closer to a fate far darker than they could have ever imagined. Madame Celeste's demands became more extravagant with each passing day,
She insisted on rare crystals and precious metals for energy focus, exotic herbs and incense for purification, and even suggested that the Morans donate significant sums to various charitable causes to curry favor with the spirits. In reality, these donations were funneled into offshore accounts controlled by Celeste herself. The psychic's manipulation extended beyond mere financial exploitation. She began to insinuate herself into every aspect of the Morans' lives. Late-night phone calls became common, with Celeste claiming to have urgent messages from the beyond. She advised Robert on business decisions, conveniently aligning her visions with her own financial interests. For Elizabeth, she became a confidant, slowly isolating her from friends and family under the guise of spiritual protection. As her influence grew, so did Madame Celeste's obsession with the occult. The rituals she performed for the Morans became darker, incorporating elements of blood magic and sacrificial rites. She spoke of ancient powers and forbidden knowledge, her eyes gleaming with a fervor that bordered on madness. The Morans, too deep in her thrall to see the danger, followed her lead without question. Behind closed doors, Celeste pored over arcane texts, convinced that she was on the brink of unlocking true supernatural power. Her sessions with other clients became perfunctory, her focus entirely on the Morans and the potential they represented. In her twisted mind, their wealth and willingness to follow her every command made them the perfect vessels for a grand ritual she was planning. As her plans took shape, Madame Celeste began to lay the groundwork for her ultimate con. She spoke to the Morans of a great awakening that would require them to sever all ties with their old life. Under her guidance, they began to liquidate assets and make preparations to transfer large sums of money. Robert, his business acumen clouded by Celeste's influence, failed to see the red flags that would have been obvious in any other circumstance. Elizabeth, lost in her grief and the promise of eternal connection with her sister, was willing to go to any lengths Madame Celeste suggested. The stage was set for a tragedy of epic proportions. Madame Celeste, her grip on reality slipping with each passing day, had convinced herself that the murder of the Morans would be the key to unlocking limitless power. She meticulously planned every detail, from the ritual site to the method of disposing of the bodies. As the night of the Great Awakening approached, an air of anticipation settled. The Morans, unaware of the fate that awaited them, prepared for what they believed would be a spiritual rebirth. At precisely midnight, the Morans arrived, dressed in the white robes Celeste had provided. Their eyes shone with a mixture of excitement and trepidation as they followed the psychic through the house and into the backyard. Robert clutched a briefcase containing documents for the transfer of their wealth, a necessary step for spiritual unburdening, as Celeste had explained. As they entered the clearing, Elizabeth gasped at the elaborate setup. A large pentagram had been drawn on the ground with what appeared to be ash, surrounded by flickering candles and strange symbols. At its center stood the altar, adorned with crystals, feathers, and a large silver chalice. Madame Celeste began the ritual, her voice rising and falling in a hypnotic chant. The words, a mix of Latin and gibberish, washed over the Morans, lulling them into a trance-like state. As the chanting intensified, Celeste instructed the couple to lie down within the pentagram, their heads toward the altar. With practiced movements, she bound their wrists and ankles with silk cords, explaining that it was to anchor their spirits during the transition. The Morans offered no resistance, their minds clouded by the intoxicating blend of incense and blind faith. As the ritual reached its climax, Madame Celeste's demeanor changed. The mask of the benevolent spiritual guide slipped away, revealing the cold, calculating eyes of a killer. From beneath the altar, she retrieved an ornate dagger, its blade glinting in the moonlight. Elizabeth was the first to realize something was terribly wrong. She began to struggle against her bonds, her voice rising in panic. Robert, shaken from his stupor by his wife's cries, demanded to know what was happening, but it was too late. With swift, brutal efficiency, Madame Celeste plunged the dagger into Elizabeth's chest. The woman's scream was cut short as blood bubbled from her lips. Robert roared in anguish and fury, thrashing wildly against his restraints. Celeste turned to him, her face spattered with his wife's blood, and brought the dagger down again and again. In the ensuing silence, broken only by the gurgling of the dying couple, Madame Celeste began to collect their blood in the silver chalice. Her movements were methodical, almost reverent, as she muttered incantations under her breath.
She truly believed that this act of supreme sacrifice would grant her the power she had long sought. As life ebbed from the Morans, Madame Celeste completed her grisly task. She dipped her fingers in the blood-filled chalice and began to draw symbols on her own skin, her eyes wild with a terrible ecstasy. In her madness, she failed to notice the faint sound of sirens in the distance. The ritual concluded. Celeste stood over the bodies of her victims, arms outstretched, waiting for the rush of power she was certain would come. But as the minutes ticked by, all she felt was a growing sense of panic and the cold realization of what she had done. With trembling hands, she began the process of cleaning up the crime scene. She had planned for this, but the reality of disposing of 2 bodies was far more daunting than she had anticipated. As she dragged the corpses towards a pre-dug grave deeper in the woods, her mind raced with plans to secure the Morans' wealth and flee Aviara Cove. In the pale light of dawn, Madame Celeste surveyed the scene of her gruesome crime. The once pristine clearing was now a tableau of horror, with blood-soaked earth and the lingering stench of death. She had managed to bury the bodies of Robert and Elizabeth Moran in the deep grave she had prepared, but evidence of the murder still littered the area. With a growing sense of panic, Celeste began the painstaking process of erasing all traces of the night's events. She gathered the blood-stained robes, the ritual implements, and the now empty chalice, stuffing them into heavy garbage bags. The pentagram was scuffed out, leaves and branches scattered over the disturbed earth. As she worked, Celeste's mind raced. She needed to establish an alibi, to create a narrative that would explain the Morans' sudden disappearance. Rushing back to the house, she showered, scrubbing away every speck of blood and dirt. She then set about creating a paper trail, forging emails and documents that suggested the couple had been planning a secret getaway. Using the information she had gleaned from her sessions with the Morans, Celeste began the complex process of accessing their accounts. She had coerced them into sharing passwords and account details under the guise of spiritual unburdening. Now, those same details would allow her to siphon off their considerable wealth. As morning turned to afternoon, Celeste made a series of calls. To the Morans' housekeeper, she explained that the couple had left for an emergency business trip. To their few close friends, she expressed concern that she hadn't heard from them since their last session. She even went so far as to call the local police, reporting that the Morans had missed an important appointment and weren't answering their phones. But even as she wove her web of lies, Celeste could feel it all unraveling. The hasty cleanup of the crime scene, the rushed cover-up, it all felt inadequate. She hadn't anticipated the overwhelming guilt and fear that now consumed her. Every car that drove past the house, every unexpected noise made her jump. As evening approached, a knock at the door sent Celeste into a panic. It was Detective Malika Collins, responding to the missing persons report Celeste herself had filed. The psychic invited her in, forcing a calm demeanor as she recounted her concerns about the Morans. Detective Collins listened intently, her keen eyes taking in every detail of Celeste's home and behavior. She asked pointed questions about the couple's last known whereabouts and their relationship with Celeste. Though the psychic maintained her composure, she could sense the detective's suspicion. As Collins left, promising to keep Celeste informed of any developments, the full weight of what she had done came crashing down on the self-proclaimed psychic. She realized that her pursuit of power and wealth had led her down a path from which there was no return. The once confident Madame Celeste was now a woman on the edge, waiting for the inevitable moment when her crimes would be discovered. Detective Malika Collins had been with the Aviara Cove Police Department for 15 years, and something about the Moran disappearance case didn't sit right with her from the start. Her instincts, honed by years on the force, told her that Madame Celeste knew more than she was letting on. In the days following her initial visit, Collins dove deep into the investigation. She interviewed the Morans' friends, colleagues, and household staff. A pattern quickly emerged. In the months leading up to their disappearance, the couple had become increasingly isolated, their behavior erratic and secretive. Collins's attention focused on their connection to Madame Celeste. She discovered that large sums of money had been flowing from the Morans' accounts to various shell companies and offshore banks. When she traced these transactions, she found a complex web of financial maneuvers that all seemed to lead back to the psychic. Intrigued by Celeste's background, Collins began to dig into her past. She uncovered a trail of complaints and suspicions spanning several states, all related to psychic fraud and con artistry.
The detective realized she was dealing with a sophisticated criminal, one who had managed to stay one step ahead of the law for years. As Collins delved deeper, she started interviewing Celeste's other clients. Many spoke of the psychic with reverence, but a few shared stories of feeling manipulated and pressured to part with large sums of money. One client, an elderly widow, tearfully recounted how Celeste had tried to convince her to sell her home and invest the proceeds in a spiritual cleansing ritual. The detective's suspicions grew when forensic analysis of the Morin's computer revealed deleted emails discussing a Great Awakening ritual with Madame Celeste. The language used was cryptic, but it was clear that the couple had been planning something significant for the night they vanished. Armed with this information, Collins obtained a warrant to search her property. As her team combed through Celeste's home and the woods behind it, the detective couldn't shake the feeling that they were on the verge of uncovering something terrible. Little did she know that buried deep in those woods lay the gruesome truth of what had really happened to Robert and Elizabeth Morin. The search of Madame Celeste's property yielded a treasure trove of evidence. Hidden in a false bottom of her antique writing desk, detectives discovered a journal detailing her deepening obsession with the occult and her plans for the Morins. The basement revealed a makeshift laboratory where she had been experimenting with various hallucinogenic compounds, likely used to enhance her clients' spiritual experiences. But it was the discovery in the woods that broke the case wide open. A cadaver dog, brought in to search the expansive property, alerted to a spot deep in the forest. As police excavated the area, they unearthed the badly decomposed bodies of Robert and Elizabeth Morin. Detective Collins, watching as the bodies were exhumed, felt a mix of vindication and horror. Her instincts had been right, but the truth was far more gruesome than she had imagined. Forensic analysis would later reveal traces of the ritual, including remnants of candle wax and unfamiliar herbs on the victim's remains. With this damning evidence in hand, Collins moved to arrest Madame Celeste, but the psychic, perhaps foreseeing the net closing around her, had fled. As the search for Celeste continued, Collins pieced together the full extent of her crimes. Financial records showed that she had managed to transfer millions from the Morins' accounts in the days following their murder. Interviews with other clients revealed a pattern of exploitation going back years. The detective also uncovered Celeste's true identity as Celeste Dupont, connecting her to unsolved cases of fraud and theft across multiple states. It became clear that the Morin murders were the culmination of a lifetime of increasingly bold and dangerous cons. Law enforcement tracked Celeste to a remote cabin in the Adirondacks. As police surrounded the property, Celeste attempted to flee into the woods. In a tense standoff, Collins confronted the self-proclaimed psychic, who was now a shell of her former confident self. "Madame Celeste or Celeste Dupont, your crimes have caught up with you," Collins called out. "There's nowhere left to run." For a moment, it seemed Celeste might try to fight or flee. But then, as if all the fight had left her at once, she sank to her knees in the damp forest floor. As Collins approached to make the arrest, Celeste looked up, her eyes filled with a mix of defeat and something else, a lingering madness that sent chills down the detective's spine. Prosecutors presented a mountain of evidence, from financial records showing the systematic draining of the Morins' accounts to the chilling contents of Celeste's personal journals. Forensic experts detailed the brutal nature of the murders, while psychologists attempted to unravel the defendant's complex psyche. Perhaps the most damning testimony came from Thomas, Celeste's former partner. He provided insight into her early cons and the evolution of her tactics, painting a picture of a woman whose greed and delusions of grandeur had spiraled out of control. Celeste's defense team attempted to argue that she was not of sound mind, presenting evidence of her deep-seated belief in the occult and her conviction that the murders were part of a genuine ritual. They portrayed her as a victim of her own delusions, manipulated by the very forces she thought she was channeling. But as the trial progressed, it became clear that Celeste's apparent madness was intertwined with a calculating intelligence. After weeks of testimony and deliberation, the jury returned a guilty verdict on all counts. The judge, citing the heinous nature of the crimes and Celeste's lack of genuine remorse, sentenced her to life in prison without the possibility of parole.
At the center of this tragic story were three individuals whose lives became inextricably intertwined. Oliver Holbrook, a charismatic local businessman, Taylor Tanner, a devoted elementary school teacher, and Claire Reeves, a newcomer with a mysterious past. Their fates collided in a perfect storm of desire, jealousy, and deceit that would leave two of them dead and the third forever changed. Oliver Holbrook was born and raised in Millbrook, the only child of Robert and Elizabeth Holbrook. From an early age, it was clear that Oliver was destined for success. His father, a prominent local attorney, instilled in him a strong work ethic and an unwavering ambition. His mother, a former beauty queen turned socialite, taught him the art of charm and social grace. Growing up, Oliver excelled in both academics and athletics. He was captain of the high school football team, president of the student council, and valedictorian of his graduating class. After high school, Oliver attended an Ivy League university where he studied business and economics. But there was another side to Oliver Holbrook, one that few people saw. Behind his winning smile and easy charm lay a calculating mind and an insatiable hunger for control. He was a master manipulator, skilled at identifying people's weaknesses and exploiting them for his own gain. In both business and his personal life, Oliver viewed relationships as transactions, always looking for what he could get out of them. Despite his success, Oliver was never satisfied. He craved constant validation and attention, a need that manifested in a string of romantic conquests. He was known as a ladies' man, leaving a trail of broken hearts in his wake. But as he approached his mid-30s, Oliver began to feel the pressure to settle down, at least outwardly. He knew that having a wife would enhance his image as a respectable businessman and pillar of the community. It was with this mindset that Oliver entered into relationships with both Taylor Tanner and Claire Reeves. In Taylor, he saw the perfect candidate for the role of Mrs. Holbrook, attractive, well-liked, and from a good family. Claire, on the other hand, represented excitement and passion, a secret indulgence he had no intention of giving up. Little did Oliver know that his carefully constructed world was about to come crashing down, set in motion by the very women he thought he could control. Taylor Tanner was the epitome of the girl next door. Born and raised in Millbrook, she was the middle child in a family of 5, with 2 older brothers and 2 younger sisters. Her parents, Michael and Linda Tanner, were pillars of the community. Her father was the town's beloved family doctor, and her mother was a longtime volunteer at the local animal shelter. Taylor's childhood was marked by warmth and stability. The Tanner household was always bustling with activity, filled with laughter, and the aroma of her mother's home-cooked meals. This nurturing environment shaped Taylor into a compassionate and empathetic young woman, always ready to lend a helping hand or a listening ear to those in need. Upon completing her degree, Taylor secured a position teaching 3rd grade at Millbrook Elementary School. It was at a local charity event, organized to raise funds for the school's new library, that Taylor first met Oliver Holbrook. She was immediately drawn to his charisma and confident demeanor. Their courtship was a whirlwind romance that seemed plucked from the pages of a fairy tale. Oliver wooed Taylor with grand gestures, surprise weekend getaways, lavish gifts, and romantic dinners at upscale restaurants. For Taylor, who had always led a relatively simple life, the attention was intoxicating. She fell deeply in love, believing she had found her soulmate. Claire Reeves arrived in Millbrook like a gust of wind, stirring up the quiet town with her mysterious past and alluring presence. Unlike Taylor and Oliver, Claire was an outsider, having grown up in a series of foster homes across the state of New York. Her childhood was marked by instability and loneliness, experiences that shaped her into a complex and often unpredictable adult. Born to a teenage mother who struggled with addiction, Claire was placed in the foster care system at the age of 3. Over the next 15 years, she bounced from one home to another, never staying in one place long enough to form lasting connections. This transient lifestyle left Claire with a deep-seated fear of abandonment and a desperate need for love and acceptance. Despite the challenges of her upbringing, Claire was fiercely intelligent and ambitious. She excelled in school, using her studies as an escape from the chaos of her personal life. Her academic success eventually earned her a scholarship to a prestigious university in New York City, where she studied psychology. After graduation, Claire worked as a marketing executive in Manhattan for several years. She was successful in her career, but her personal life was a series of short-lived, tumultuous relationships. Each failed romance left her feeling more empty and desperate for connection. It was in the wake of a particularly painful breakup that Claire decided to leave the city behind and start fresh. She had inherited a modest sum of money from a former foster mother who had shown her particular kindness, and she used this windfall to buy a small cottage on the outskirts of Millbrook. Claire was drawn to the town's picturesque charm and the promise of a simpler life. Upon her arrival in Millbrook, Claire quickly caught the attention of the locals. Her striking looks and big city sophistication made her stand out in the small town. She found work as a consultant for local businesses, using her marketing expertise to help them expand their reach. It was at one of these consulting jobs that Claire first encountered Oliver Holbrook. The attraction between them was immediate and electric. In Oliver, Claire saw everything she had ever wanted: success, stability, and the promise of love. For the first time in her life, she allowed herself to hope for a happy ending. As Claire and Oliver began their clandestine affair, she convinced herself that she had finally found her place in the world. She threw herself into the relationship with the desperation of someone who had never known true belonging. However, Claire's fragile sense of security would soon be shattered by the revelation of Oliver's engagement to Taylor. This betrayal would trigger all of Claire's deepest fears and insecurities, setting in motion a tragic chain of events that would leave an indelible mark on the town of Millbrook. As summer turned to fall in Millbrook, the lives of Oliver, Taylor, and Claire became increasingly entangled in a complex web of desire, deceit, and jealousy. Oliver, ever the skilled manipulator, carefully navigated his relationships with both women, feeding each of them just enough attention and affection to keep them invested. With Taylor, Oliver played the role of the devoted fiancé. He attended local events by her side, charmed her family at Sunday dinners, and made grand plans for their future together. Taylor basked in the glow of their engagement, excitedly sharing details of their upcoming wedding with anyone who would listen. Meanwhile, Oliver's encounters with Claire took place in the shadows. They met in out-of-the-way restaurants in neighboring towns, or at Claire's secluded cottage. During these stolen moments, Oliver showered Claire with the passion and intensity that he carefully held back from Taylor. He fed Claire's hopes with vague promises of a future together, always with the caveat that he needed time to handle things with Taylor. As the weeks passed, tension began to build between Taylor and Claire. Even though Taylor remained unaware of the true nature of Claire's relationship with Oliver, the two women often found themselves at the same local events, with Claire's presence invariably drawing Oliver's attention away from his fiancée. Taylor, trusting and naive, initially tried to befriend Claire. Sensing the newcomer's loneliness, she invited Claire to girls' nights out and community functions, unwittingly providing more opportunities for Oliver and Claire to cross paths. Claire, consumed by her feelings for Oliver and racked with guilt over betraying Taylor's friendly overtures, became increasingly volatile. Her behavior swung between overly solicitous towards Taylor and barely concealed hostility. These mood swings did not go unnoticed by the townspeople, who began to speculate about the source of Claire's apparent instability. Oliver observed the growing friction between the two women, with a mixture of anxiety and satisfaction. While he worried about his carefully constructed double life unraveling, he also reveled in the knowledge that two beautiful women were competing for his affections. As autumn progressed, and the date of Oliver and Taylor's wedding drew nearer, the situation became increasingly untenable. Claire's demands for Oliver to leave Taylor grew more frequent and desperate, while Taylor remained blissfully unaware of the storm brewing around her. Little did any of them know that their actions over the next few months would shatter the peaceful facade of Millbrook and change their lives forever. On a crisp October morning, the day of Oliver and Taylor's wedding arrived. The entire town of Millbrook seemed to be in attendance, filling the picturesque white church to capacity. Taylor, radiant in a classic white gown, walked down the aisle on her father's arm, her face beaming with joy and love. Oliver stood at the altar, outwardly the picture of a happy groom, but those who knew him well might have noticed a flicker of unease in his eyes, a tension in his shoulders that belied his calm exterior. As he recited his vows, promising to love and cherish Taylor for all eternity, his thoughts couldn't help but stray to Claire. Unbeknownst to the happy couple and their guests, Claire was outside the church, hidden from view but close enough to hear the ceremony. Each word of love and devotion that echoed from within the building was like a dagger to her heart. As the church bells rang out, signaling the completion of the ceremony, Claire felt something inside her snap. The reception that followed was a joyous affair, with the entire town celebrating the union of two of its most beloved residents. Taylor danced and laughed, surrounded by friends and family, while Oliver played his role to perfection, ever the charming and attentive new husband. But as the night wore on and the champagne flowed freely, Oliver found his mask slipping. More than once, Taylor caught him staring off into the distance, a troubled expression on his face. When she asked what was wrong, he brushed off her concerns with a quick smile and a kiss. As the newlyweds drove off to their honeymoon, tin cans rattling behind their car and well wishes ringing in their ears, neither of them could have imagined the dark turn their lives were about to take. For in the shadows, Claire Reeves was already plotting her revenge. In the weeks following Oliver and Taylor's wedding, Claire Reeves spiraled into a pit of despair and obsession. The life she had imagined for herself, a future with Oliver, had been snatched away, leaving her feeling betrayed and discarded. Her fragile psyche, already damaged by years of abandonment and instability, began to fracture under the weight of her grief and anger. At first, Claire tried to move on. She threw herself into her work, taking on more consulting projects than ever before. She attempted to socialize, accepting invitations to local gatherings and community events. But everywhere she went, she was confronted with reminders of Oliver and Taylor's happiness. The newlyweds were the talk of the town, their smiling faces seeming to mock Claire at every turn. As her pain deepened, Claire's behavior became increasingly erratic. She started showing up late to meetings or missing them entirely. Her appearance, once impeccable, grew disheveled. Concerned neighbors reported seeing her wandering the streets late at night, muttering to herself. But it was Claire's growing obsession with Taylor that truly marked her descent into madness. She began stalking the young teacher, following her to and from work, watching her house from a distance. Claire convinced herself that if she could just understand Taylor, figure out what made her so special in Oliver's eyes, she could win him back. Claire's cottage became a shrine to her obsession. Walls were covered with photos of Taylor cut from local newspapers and printouts from social media. She created elaborate timelines and diagrams, trying to piece together every detail of Taylor's life and her relationship with Oliver. As weeks turned into months, Claire's fantasies grew darker. She began to imagine scenarios where Taylor was out of the picture, leaving the path clear for her to reclaim Oliver's affections. At first, these were harmless daydreams, Taylor moving away or realizing she didn't love Oliver after all. But gradually, Claire's thoughts turned to murder. She spent hours researching different methods, weighing the pros and cons of each with a detached, almost clinical precision. She created multiple plans, each more elaborate than the last, always careful to cover her tracks and establish alibis. Throughout this time, Claire maintained sporadic contact with Oliver. Their encounters were brief and increasingly tense, with Claire alternating between desperate pleas for him to leave Taylor and icy accusations of betrayal. Oliver, growing uncomfortable with Claire's intensity, began to distance himself, unaware of the dangerous turn her obsession had taken. As winter settled over Millbrook, Claire's plans began to crystallize. She had chosen her method, a staged hit-and-run accident that would leave no trace of her involvement. In her deluded mind, she had convinced herself that eliminating Taylor was not just for her own benefit, but for Oliver's as well. She truly believed that he was trapped in an unhappy marriage and that she would be liberating him. The night before she planned to carry out her deadly scheme, Claire stood in front of her mirror, barely recognizing the wild-eyed woman staring back at her. For a brief moment, a flicker of doubt crossed her mind, but then she remembered the sound of wedding bells, the sight of Oliver kissing his bride, and her resolve hardened once more. On a foggy Wednesday morning in February, Taylor Tanner Holbrook left her house for her daily jog, just as she had done countless times before. The streets were quiet, most of Millbrook's residents still tucked away in their warm beds. Taylor, with her bright yellow running jacket and bouncing ponytail, was a spot of color in the gray landscape. Unbeknownst to Taylor, Claire Reeves was waiting, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and anticipation. She sat in a stolen car at the end of a secluded stretch of road, her hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles had turned white. As Taylor's form appeared through the mist, Claire took a deep breath and turned the key in the ignition. The next few moments passed in a blur of screeching tires, a muffled scream, and the sickening thud of impact. Claire, operating on autopilot, quickly drove away from the scene, leaving Taylor's crumpled body on the side of the road. It was a jogger who found Taylor an hour later. By then, it was too late. Despite the best efforts of paramedics, Taylor was pronounced dead at the scene. The news spread through Millbrook like wildfire, leaving the town reeling in shock and grief. In the immediate aftermath, Claire's plan seemed to work perfectly. The police initially treated the incident as a tragic hit-and-run accident. Claire had meticulously planned her alibi, making sure she was seen at a 24-hour diner in a neighboring town both before and after the time of Taylor's death. Oliver, upon hearing the news of his wife's death, put on a convincing display of grief. He wept openly at the funeral, leaning on friends and family for support. To all outward appearances, he was a devastated widower, struggling to come to terms with his loss. But as the initial shock wore off and the investigation deepened, cracks began to appear in the facade. Detective Lisa Montague, assigned to the case, sensed that there was more to Taylor's death than a simple accident. As she dug deeper, she began to uncover the tangled web of relationships that had led to this tragic event. Meanwhile, Claire watched from the sidelines, a mix of guilt and triumph warring within her. She had achieved her goal. Taylor was gone. Now surely Oliver would be hers. But as the days passed and Oliver remained distant, doubt began to creep into her mind. Had she made a terrible mistake? In the weeks following Taylor's death, Millbrook was shrouded in a pall of grief and suspicion. The once friendly neighbors now eyed each other warily, wondering if a killer walked among them. Detective Montague's investigation sent ripples through the community as she interviewed friends, family, and acquaintances of Taylor. Oliver Holbrook maintained his role as the grieving widower, making tearful appearances on local news channels and offering a substantial reward for information leading to the arrest of Taylor's killer. He threw himself into charity work in Taylor's name, establishing a foundation to support local education initiatives. Claire, meanwhile, struggled to maintain her composure. The guilt of her actions weighed heavily on her. Manifesting in bouts of insomnia and panic attacks, she obsessively followed the news of the investigation, terrified that each day would bring a knock on her door from the police. As Detective Montague delved deeper into Taylor's life, she began to uncover inconsistencies in Oliver's story. Several witnesses reported seeing him arguing with Taylor in the weeks leading up to her death. Financial records showed large, unexplained withdrawals from their joint account. The detective's attention also turned to Claire. Her erratic behavior in the months prior to Taylor's death had not gone unnoticed, and her sudden calming in the aftermath raised suspicions. When questioned, Claire's alibi seemed airtight, but Montague sensed she was hiding something. As winter gave way to spring, Claire's initial elation at having eliminated her rival began to fade, replaced by a growing sense of unease. Despite her expectations, Oliver had not rushed into her arms in the wake of Taylor's death. In fact, he had become increasingly distant, avoiding her calls and making excuses to cancel their planned meetings. Frustrated and confused, Claire decided to confront Oliver at his office after hours. As she approached the building, she noticed a light on in his window. Peering inside, she saw Oliver in an intimate embrace with a woman she didn't recognize. The sight sent Claire reeling, her world crumbling around her. In that moment, the full weight of what she had done came crashing down on Claire. She had murdered an innocent woman, destroyed countless lives, all for a man who had never truly cared for her. The realization was devastating. Overwhelmed by guilt and anger, Claire stormed into Oliver's office, catching him and the unknown woman by surprise. What followed was a heated confrontation, with Claire unleashing years of pent-up pain and rage. She accused Oliver of using her, of manipulating her feelings to get rid of Taylor. Oliver, his carefully constructed facade finally cracking, didn't deny her accusations. Instead, he coldly informed Claire that she had served her purpose and was no longer needed. He threatened to expose her role in Taylor's death if she didn't disappear from his life for good. Shattered and desperate, Claire fled the office, her mind racing. She now realized the true extent of Oliver's manipulation and her own terrible mistake. As she drove home in a daze, Claire was unaware that her confrontation with Oliver had been witnessed by someone else, someone who would soon set in motion the final act of this tragic play. The woman Claire had seen with Oliver was Olivia Chen, a brilliant young lawyer who had recently joined Oliver's firm. Olivia had been drawn into an affair with Oliver, seduced by his charm and the promise of career advancement. However, unlike Claire,
Olivia was not blind to Oliver's true nature. On the night of Claire's confrontation with Oliver, Olivia had hidden herself in an adjoining room, overhearing every word of their heated exchange. The revelation of Oliver's involvement in his wife's death left her cold with horror and disgust. In the days that followed, Olivia found herself grappling with a moral dilemma. She knew she should go to the police with what she had learned, but fear of professional repercussions and her own complicity in the affair held her back. As she observed Oliver continuing to play the role of grieving widower, her revulsion grew. Determined to uncover the full truth, Olivia began her own covert investigation. She meticulously combed through Oliver's files and emails, slowly piecing together the extent of his deceit. What she discovered went far beyond Taylor's murder, revealing a pattern of fraud and manipulation that spanned years. With each new revelation, Olivia's resolve strengthened. She knew what she had to do. Armed with the evidence she had gathered, Olivia confronted Oliver in his office late one evening. She laid out everything she had discovered, from his manipulation of Claire to his fraudulent business practices. Oliver, realizing the precariousness of his situation, attempted to charm and threaten Olivia into silence. But Olivia was prepared. She had secretly recorded their entire conversation, capturing Oliver's implicit admission of guilt. As she turned to leave, intending to take her evidence to the police, Oliver snapped. In a moment of panic and rage, he attacked Olivia, attempting to wrestle the recording device from her hands. What Oliver didn't know was that Olivia, haunted by the fate of Taylor Tanner Holbrook, had come prepared. In the struggle, she managed to reach into her purse and pull out a small pistol. A shot rang out, echoing through the empty office building. Oliver Holbrook, the man who had manipulated so many, who had indirectly caused the death of his wife and the ruin of Claire Reeves, crumpled to the floor. Olivia stood over him, the smoking gun still in her hand, a mix of shock and grim satisfaction on her face. As sirens wailed in the distance, Olivia calmly sat down to wait for the police. She knew that her actions would have consequences, but she also knew that the truth would finally come to light. Oliver Holbrook's reign of deception was over. The shot that killed Oliver Holbrook reverberated through Millbrook, setting off a chain reaction that would finally bring the full story of Taylor's death to light. As Olivia Chen was taken into custody, the true extent of Oliver's manipulations began to unravel. In the wake of Oliver Holbrook's death, the investigation into Taylor's murder took on new urgency. Detective Montague, armed with the evidence Olivia had gathered, began to piece together the full picture of events that had transpired over the past year. Claire Reeves, racked with guilt and fear, finally broke down under questioning. She confessed to her role in Taylor's death, providing a detailed account of her actions and motivations. Her testimony painted a damning picture of Oliver's manipulation and the extent to which he had orchestrated the events leading to his wife's murder. Claire, having confessed to Taylor's murder, was sentenced to life in prison. Olivia's case was more complex. She was convicted of manslaughter, but received a reduced sentence due to the circumstances surrounding Oliver's death. The tragic tale of Oliver Holbrook, Taylor Tanner, Claire Reeves, and Olivia Chen would be remembered for years to come, a somber reminder of the darkness that can lurk beneath even the most picturesque surfaces.